Hi guys, welcome to the Quiet Past Historical Channel. Tonight you're stepping into something older than memory, not into a museum, not into a textbook, but into the living, breathing world of people who have been falling asleep under the same stars for thousands of years, people who looked up at the same darkness you are looking into right now, and who filled it with stories. Across every continent, from the frozen tundra of the far north to the red desert heart of Australia, from the dense green forests of the Amazon to the windswept plains of North America, human beings have always done one thing at the end of the day. They gathered, they sat close to whatever warmth they had, and someone began to speak. Tonight, that someone is you. Or rather, it is the voice that reaches you across time, slow, patient, unhurried, carrying the small and beautiful details of lives that were different from yours in almost every way, and yet somehow deeply, quietly the same. There is no urgency here, no alarm to set, know where you need to be, just the soft crackle of something old and warm and a world waiting to be walked through at the pace of falling leaves. Before we begin, if you find yourself returning to this kind of calm historical storytelling, the slow kind, the kind that is meant to carry you somewhere peaceful, then consider staying close to this channel. A quiet subscription costs nothing, and it means these stories will find their way back to you whenever you need them. And now, settle in, pull whatever warmth you have a little closer, let your shoulders drop, let your breathing slow, because tonight we are going a very long way back. The Dreamtime, Aboriginal Australia, when the earth was still being made, there is a place in central Australia where the land looks as though it has been dreaming. The rock rises from the earth in great smooth curves, the color of burnt ochre and old fire, glowing at sunrise in shades that seem almost alive. The grass around it is thin and pale and moves in ways that make you feel the land itself is breathing. The sky above it is the kind of blue that has no end, that goes so deep and so far that looking at it too long makes something inside you go quiet. This is the country of the Anangu people, and in this country the ground beneath your feet is not simply dirt and stone. It is story. Every ridge, every waterhole, every bend in a dry riverbed has a name, and behind that name is a narrative so old it does not measure itself in years. The Anangu call this the Tijukurpa. Some people translate it as the Dreamtime, but the Anangu themselves say that translation is a little like trying to catch water in a net. It holds something, but most of it slips through. Tijukurpa is closer to something like the law, the way things are, the story that was told before the telling of stories that created the world in the act of describing it. It goes something like this. In the beginning, the earth was flat and featureless. There was no hill, no valley, no riverbed, no stone formation. There was only a kind of potential, a sleeping, waiting, unformed world. And then the ancestor beings woke. They rose from the earth. They walked across the surface of the world. And as they walked, they sang. This is important. The singing was not a celebration of the world. The singing was the creation of it. Every word of every song was a step that shaped the land. A hill rose where an ancestor paused. A waterhole formed where one sat and wept. A stretch of red stone marked where two ancestors fought and fell, their bodies becoming the landscape. The ancestors traveled in paths called songlines, invisible roads drawn across the continent by the act of singing. These paths still exist. You can walk them. If you know the songs, you can navigate across thousands of miles of desert by singing your way from landmark to landmark, because each landmark is a verse in a song that stretches across the country like a great invisible map. Let that sit with you for a moment, a map made of music, a geography recorded not in ink but in melody, a landscape so deeply memorized that it becomes indistinguishable from the body that remembers it. The Anangu people have been living in this country for at least 50,000 years. Some estimates push that number higher. 50,000 years is a span of time almost impossible to comprehend. It is 10 times longer than the oldest cities in the world. It is longer than the existence of agriculture. It is a human presence so deep, so continuous that it has genuinely become part of the landscape. And through all of those years, every night when the light faded and the desert cooled with startling speed, because the desert at night becomes cold in ways that surprise people who have never experienced it, the temperature dropping 30 degrees or more between afternoon and midnight. When all of that happened, people gathered. They sat near fires. And they told the stories again. Let us imagine such a night. The fire is not large. It does not need to be. In the desert, a modest fire is enough for warmth, enough for light, enough to draw a circle of faces out of the dark. The wood used for these fires is particular. Mulga wood burns slowly and hot, with almost no flame, just a deep red glow at the heart of it that pulses like breathing. Dry spinifex catches quickly and gives a brief bright flare, used to start the fire, then settles down. The smoke rises in a thin straight column into the clear air and disappears against the stars. And the stars here are extraordinary. In the desert, far from any city, the Milky Way does not look like a faint smear of light the way it does in most places people live today. It looks structural. It looks like architecture. A great river of cold fire running from horizon to horizon, so dense and bright that you can read by it, almost, or at least you can see the faces of the people sitting across from you. The Anangu have their own astronomy. It is one of the oldest astronomical traditions in the world. Most astronomical traditions look at the stars at the points of light themselves and make patterns from them. Constellations. The ancient Greeks did this. The Babylonians did this. The Chinese did this. They connected bright stars into shapes and gave those shapes stories. The Anangu do something different. They look at the darkness between the stars. In the dense river of the Milky Way, there are gaps, dark patches where clouds of dust and gas absorb the light of the stars behind them, creating shapes of shadow against the brightness. These dark shapes are called dark constellations. And for the Anangu, these dark constellations form figures and creatures just as meaningful as any star-to-star drawing. The most famous of these is the emu in the sky. Look at the Milky Way in the southern hemisphere in the right season, and you can see it, a long dark shape that stretches and curves through the brightness, two great dark wings, a body, a head. An emu, enormous and ancient, walking across the sky. The position of the emu in the sky changes through the seasons. When the emu appears in a particular position, it is time to collect emu eggs. When it shifts to another angle, the season has changed, the eggs are no longer worth collecting, and it is time to think about something else. The emu in the sky is not decoration. It is a calendar. It is an almanac written in shadow. And every night, when someone sat by a fire in the desert and looked up and saw the emu walking, they were reading the same page that had been read every year for 50,000 years. The stories told by firelight in Aboriginal communities across Australia are not uniform. Australia is an enormous continent, nearly as large as the continental United States, and the Aboriginal peoples of Australia are not a single group. They are hundreds of distinct nations, each with their own language, their own traditions, their own songlines, their own relationship with their particular piece of country. But there are certain patterns that appear across many traditions. Stories are often told in layers. A story that sounds on its surface like a simple tale about animals, a crow and a hawk, a snake and a lizard, a kangaroo and a dingo, carries within it a layer of instruction. The behavior of the animals reflects the correct behavior of people. The consequences that befall an animal who acts selfishly or who disrespects another creature are the same consequences that will befall a person who behaves the same way. And beneath that layer is another layer still, a layer that only certain people who have been through certain ceremonies and reached certain stages of knowledge can hear. A layer about the land itself, about sacred sites, about the movements of ancestor beings, about the deep structure of the Tjukurpa. Stories are not told all at once. Some parts are only told at certain times of year. Some parts are only told to certain people. Some stories are men's stories, told only to men who have been through initiation. Some are women's stories, held by the women's communities and not shared with men. Some are children's stories, the surface layer, the animal tale, and the child who grows into an adult will hear the same story again, and it will be different because they are different. Knowledge in this tradition is not flat. It is not a container you fill up all at once. It is something you grow into, like a tree growing into its full height slowly over a lifetime. Let us think about the children for a moment. A child growing up in a traditional Aboriginal community in the Australian desert lives in a world dense with information. Every rock, every plant, every animal behavior carries meaning. The child learns to read this world the way we learn to read text, slowly at first, with guidance, recognizing first the most obvious patterns, then the subtler ones. Before a child can understand the Tjukurpa in any depth, they must first understand the country. And understanding the country means being in it, walking through it, learning its rhythms. At night, after the day's walking and learning, the child sits with the elders. The elders' voice is usually low, not because they are trying to create a mood, though the mood is created, but because in the desert at night, you do not need to speak loudly. Sound carries. The desert is so quiet that a voice at conversational volume fills the night around the fire completely. The elder might begin with the land that was walked that day. They might point to a distant rock formation visible even in the moonlight and say, "Do you know what that is?" And then before the child can answer, they begin. The story might be about a parenti, the great monitor lizard of the desert, which can grow to 2 meters in length and moves with an unhurried, ancient confidence that suggests it has seen everything and is surprised by nothing. The parenti in the story might be traveling, as the ancestors traveled through the country, and as it travels, it encounters situations that require choices. The parenti might come to a waterhole where another creature is drinking and must decide whether to share or to claim the water for itself. The parenti might encounter a young parenti that is lost and must decide whether to help or to pass by. The parenti might find food, a nest of eggs, a sleeping lizard, and must decide whether to take more than it needs. The story is told slowly. There is no rushing to the moral. The moral, in fact, may never be stated explicitly. The elder trusts the child to sit with the story, to feel it, to let its meaning arrange itself inside the mind the way furniture arranges itself in a room slowly, through living in the space. And then the fire burns lower, and the stars wheel overhead, and the child's eyes grow heavy, and the elder's voice becomes quieter still, a thread of sound in the enormous quiet of the desert night, and the story becomes something between waking and sleeping, something that enters the mind through a door that is only open when the guard of full consciousness has stepped away from its post. This is the purpose of the bedtime story in its oldest form. Not to transmit information in the way that a textbook transmits information, but to plant something, a seed of understanding, a shape of value, a way of seeing, in the quiet soil of a mind that is letting go of the day. The desert at night makes sounds that seem at first like silence. There is the occasional pop of the fire. There is the thin, high sound of wind moving through spinifex grass, which makes a sound like distant whispering. There is the call of a bird, the tawny frogmouth, perhaps, which makes a low booming sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, or the southern bubuk owl, a quick repeated hoot that sounds almost mechanical in its regularity. And beneath all of it, the absolute silence of a landscape that is simply being itself. The Milky Way rotates slowly overhead. From the southern hemisphere, you can see the Southern Cross, 4 bright stars and 1 dimmer one, arranged in a cross shape that tilts and turns through the night. Aboriginal peoples across Australia have their own understandings of the Southern Cross. In some traditions, the 2 bright pointer stars nearby are the eyes of a great spirit. In others, the cross itself is a possum in a tree. In others still, it marks a particular sacred site, and its position in the sky tells you which direction that site lies. In a country with no written maps, the sky is a map. In a country with no written history, the sky is a library, and every night for 50,000 years someone looked up and read it. There is something comforting about that continuity, something that makes the night feel less like an absence of day and more like a place in its own right, a dimension of time and story that human beings have always inhabited, and in which you right now are not alone. The fire dies to embers. The glow is orange, then red, then a pale red that is almost pink, pulsing with each small breath of wind. The children sleep. The elders stay awake a little longer, watching the coals, watching the stars, watching the dark shapes of the sleeping country around them. Tomorrow there will be walking to do. There will be food to find and water to locate and children to teach and country to care for. But tonight the land breathes quietly, and the stories are safely inside the people who will carry them, and that is enough. The longhouses, Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, northeastern North America, when the roof is made of bark, and as the night deepens, let us travel. Let us leave the red desert and its vast silence and move to a different kind of darkness, the green darkness of the northeastern forests of North America, where the trees press close together and the light, even in summer, falls in broken pieces, filtered through a ceiling of leaves so dense it feels like living inside something's chest. The year is difficult to name precisely. Let us say it is sometime in the 16th century, or perhaps the 15th, or perhaps earlier still. Before the world these people knew had been complicated by the arrival of Europeans, in a period when the forests stretched unbroken from the Atlantic coast to the Great Lakes and beyond, when the rivers were full of fish so dense you could almost walk across them, when the only roads were the paths worn by feet that had followed the same routes for generations. This is the country of the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse. You may know them by the name the French gave them, the Iroquois, but they called themselves by their own name, which translates loosely as the people who build the Longhouse, or more beautifully, the people of the extended lodge, and the Longhouse is where we begin. It is an extraordinary structure, and it is worth stopping to really see it. The Longhouse is built from the forest. Literally, the same trees that surround the village provide the material. Young, flexible saplings are bent into arcs and lashed together with basswood fiber to create a frame shaped like a tunnel or the hull of a great upturned boat. Over this frame, sheets of elm bark are layered like scales, each sheet overlapping the one below it to shed rain, laid in rows from bottom to top, the whole surface held in place with more poles lashed horizontally across the outside. The result is a building that looks, from the outside, like something the forest grew itself. Brown, textured, organic smelling of wood and earth and the particular resinous sharpness of elm. It blends with the trees around it in a way that feels intentional, though it may not be. It is simply what happens when you build with what is locally available, when the building and the landscape share the same material vocabulary. Inside, the Longhouse is a world. The longest ones are extraordinary in scale. Some recorded longhouses were nearly 70 meters long, wide enough for a path down the center, and 2 raised sleeping platforms on either side. The platforms run the full length of the building, one on each side, about a meter above the ground, wide enough for a family to sleep on with some room to spare, covered with mats woven from cattail reeds and furs of beaver and deer and bear. Above each sleeping platform, more shelves storing the things a family needs, dried corn in braided husks hanging from the rafters, clay pots sealed with bark lids, folded clothing, tools, baskets woven tight enough to hold water, dried herbs and medicines bundled with cord, the small personal objects that every family accumulates, the things that make a space feel like home. Down the center of the Longhouse, at regular intervals, fire, not one fire. Multiple fires, each one shared by 2 families, one family on each side of the building. their sleeping platforms facing each other across the central path, sharing a fire pit between them. The smoke from these fires rises to small holes in the roof above, which can be opened or closed by adjusting bark covers using poles from the inside. When it works well, the longhouse is warm and relatively smoke-free. When the wind changes direction and pushes smoke back in through the roof holes, the interior fills with a thin haze that makes eyes water, and everyone coughs quietly and adjusts the bark covers and waits. This is winter inside the longhouse. Outside, snow. Feet of it sometimes. The northeastern forests in winter are capable of extraordinary snowfall, the kind that silences everything, that buries the world up to the lowest branches of the trees. The temperature drops far below freezing. The rivers slow, then freeze. The deer move to sheltered areas and stand very still, conserving warmth, moving as little as possible. But inside the longhouse, there is fire, and there is family, and there is warmth, and there is food stored through the summer and autumn in exactly the quantities needed to last until spring. The Haudenosaunee called their agricultural staples the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash. These three plants were grown together in a system that modern agriculture is only now beginning to fully appreciate. The corn grows tall, providing a structure for the beans to climb. The beans fix nitrogen in the soil, enriching it for the other plants. The squash spreads along the ground, its large leaves shading out weeds and keeping the soil moist. Together, they create more food than any of them would alone. And together in dried form, stored in bark containers in the rafters of the longhouse, they are the foundation of winter survival. The corn is dried and can be stored for years. It is ground into flour on flat stones, mixed with water, shaped into cakes, cooked on flat rocks beside the fire. The smell of corn flour cooking is warm and slightly sweet, earthy in a way that makes the mouth water before the food is even ready. The beans are dried and rehydrated in cooking. They simmer slowly in clay pots, absorbing water, swelling back to their summer fullness, releasing a rich, starchy smell that fills the longhouse. The squash, large, thick-skinned winter squash, can be stored whole for months in the cold of the longhouse's lower shelves. Cut open and cooked, they are sweet and dense and filling in a way that feels like the distilled effort of summer. Evening in the longhouse in winter is a particular thing. The light outside fades early. By mid-afternoon in the depths of winter, the forest is already going gray, the pale winter light retreating from the trees, the temperature beginning its sharp drop. Inside the longhouse, the fires are built up against the coming cold. Dried wood carefully collected and stored in racks outside the longhouse entrance, protected from snow by an overhanging bark roof, is added piece by piece. Sound of the fire is constant and varied. The high snap of a small piece of dry birch, the low steady hiss of a larger log, the occasional pop and shower of sparks when something pockets of gas releases. The light from multiple fires fills the longhouse with a warm, shifting glow, nothing like the flat, even light of a modern room. There are shadows everywhere. Things on the upper shelves are half visible, their shapes familiar, their details softened by firelight and distance. The children of the longhouse are numerous. The Haudenosaunee were a matrilineal society. Descent was traced through the mother's line, not the father's. This meant that the longhouse was, in a sense, a mother's house. The eldest woman of the longhouse held authority over the domestic space and over the families within it. Her daughters and their families lived in the longhouse with her. Her sons grew up in her longhouse, but would move, when they married, to the longhouse of their wife's family. This gave the women of the longhouse a particular kind of stability and power. They controlled the food stores. They made decisions about who ate what and when. And in the political structure of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, one of the most sophisticated political systems in the pre-European Americas, it was the elder women who selected the male leaders, the sachems, and who had the power to remove them if they governed poorly. But on a winter evening, in the warm interior of a longhouse with the snow pressing quietly outside and the fires burning and the food simmering, the politics of the Confederacy are a distant thing. The children are everywhere. They run the length of the central path, ducking between adults, squealing, arguing, making the kind of noise that is the background music of anywhere children are gathered. Older children chase younger ones. Babies cry and are picked up and soothed and set down again. Dogs. The Haudenosaunee kept dogs, the only domesticated animal in northeastern North America before European contact, moved through the longhouse in the casual, confident way of animals who belong and know it, finding spots near the fire, accepting scraps, occasionally getting underfoot. And then gradually, as the evening deepens and the food is eaten and the fires begin to burn a little lower, things slow. The smaller children begin to flag. Their energy, which had seemed inexhaustible, begins to drain visibly. Eyes grow heavy. Arguments lose their urgency. One by one, they are gathered up by mothers, by grandmothers, by aunts, and settled onto the sleeping platforms, wrapped in furs tucked close. And then the stories begin. The Haudenosaunee have a rich tradition of storytelling, but winter is its season. There is a specific reason for this, stated plainly in many traditions. certain stories can only be told in winter after the first frost when the snakes are sleeping. This is not just metaphor. There is a practical concern embedded in it. Some stories, if told in summer, might attract the wrong kind of attention, might draw spiritual forces that are active in warm weather. In winter, certain things sleep, and the stories are safer to tell. The stories gathered around the fires of the longhouse in winter are called, in many traditions, the winter stories or the ancient stories. They are distinct from the news of the day, the gossip of the village, the instructional talk about how to do things. They are a specific category of narrative, held apart, recognized by both teller and listener as something with a different kind of weight. One of the most famous of these is the story of Sky Woman. It begins in the sky world, which exists above the earth, separated from it by a great void. In the sky world, things are not so different from the earth. There are people, there are relationships, there are conflicts and resolutions in the ordinary texture of life. But there is one great tree at the center of the sky world, a tree so ancient and so central to the world's structure that disturbing it risks disturbing everything. And yet, in the story, the tree is disturbed. It is uprooted or a hole is made beneath it, and through that hole a woman falls. She falls a very long way. Below the sky world there is only water. Water stretching to every horizon, and in that water the creatures who live there, water birds, turtles, beavers, otters, the beings who existed before the dry land. These creatures see the woman falling and they act. The birds fly up to catch her, holding her above the water on their wings, but they cannot hold her forever. So the animals gather and discuss. Where can she stand? What can support her? The turtle offers its back. The great turtle rises from the depths and the woman is lowered onto its back, which is wide and solid and able to bear her. And then the animals dive to bring earth up from the bottom of the water. Only the muskrat succeeds, surfacing with a tiny ball of earth in its paw, already dying from the depth and the effort. And this earth is spread on the turtle's back and grows and grows and grows. This is how the world is made. This is why some traditions still call North America Turtle Island. The woman who fell from the sky is the mother of the world. She is the first grandmother. And from her come the beings who will populate the earth, and from those beings come the nations. And from the nations come the people sitting by the fire right now, listening to her story being told for the 10,000th time. The telling is slow. A good storyteller does not rush Sky Woman's fall. They let you feel the void beneath her, the enormous empty dark, the birds rising, the water far below. They let you wait with the animals while the muskrat dives and does not come back up and the other animals wait and wait and wait. And then the tiny body surfaces and the tiny paw opens to reveal the earth, and there is a collective breath released. The children who are still awake listen with their eyes very wide, even the ones who have heard this story many times, because the story is different each time. The teller finds different moments to slow, different details to linger on. The world made on the turtle's back is always slightly different. Sometimes the earth is described as smelling a certain way. Sometimes the water has a color. Sometimes the birds have names. And the children who are falling asleep hear it differently still, from a place between the story and the dream, where the two merge, where Sky Woman's fall becomes a falling into sleep, where the turtle's steady back becomes the solid platform of the sleeping mat beneath them, where the warmth of the fur covering them is indistinguishable from the warmth of the story surrounding them. Slowly, the longhouse quiets. The fires burn lower. The adults continue talking in low voices. There are things to discuss always in a community of this kind. Plans for the next day's work, concerns about the winter stores, the health of someone who has been unwell, the news that came from another village with the last traveler. But the voices drop instinctively as the children sleep. Outside, the snow continues to fall, or has stopped, and the world is very still, and the cold presses against the bark walls of the longhouse, and the fires push back, and inside there is warmth, and the smell of food and wood smoke and furs and the particular human smell of many people living close together, which is not unpleasant when it is the smell of your own people, which is, in fact, the smell of home. The great turtles in the story carry the world on their backs. The longhouse carries its people through the winter on its own kind of back, and the night deepens and the fires breathe and the stories settle into the sleeping minds of children, and the world is made and remade and made again in the dark. The ice in the story Inuit communities of the Arctic. The long night has its own light. Meanwhile, in another quiet corner of history, let us go further north, much further north. Until the trees thin out and disappear and the land becomes something else entirely, something flat and vast and empty in a way that is almost spiritual, a landscape so stripped of the usual comforts of geography that the mind has nothing to rest on except the sky, which is enormous, and the snow, which is endless, and the horizon, which is so perfectly circular that standing at the center of it you feel the curvature of the earth. This is the Arctic. And in the Arctic, for thousands of years, human beings have lived. This is worth pausing on. The Arctic is not a hospitable environment. In winter, the temperature drops to temperatures that kill unprotected humans in minutes. In some places, the sun does not rise for weeks, even months. The darkness is complete, not the partial darkness of a cloudy night in a temperate climate, but a full, absolute darkness that lasts through what the clock says are daytime hours. The wind, when it comes, cuts through everything. The snow can fall horizontally, and yet, the Inuit people, whose traditional territories stretch across an enormous arc from Alaska to Greenland, across the top of the world, have not merely survived in this environment. They have created in it a culture of extraordinary richness and beauty. They have developed technologies precisely suited to this place. The kayak, the umiak, the harpoon, the snow house, clothing constructed with such insulating precision that it keeps a person alive in conditions that should be fatal. And they have created stories. The winter in the Arctic, in the period we are imagining, let us say the 18th century, before the full disruption of contact, when the traditions were still intact, winter in the Arctic means the kagak. The kagak is a large communal snow house built for gatherings, where the family igloo is a private space, curved and small and intimate, built for sleeping and eating and sheltering from the storm. The kagak is public. It is built together by the community, and it is the community's living room, its theater, its temple. Let us walk into one. The entrance is a tunnel you must bend low, almost crawl to pass through it. This is by design. The tunnel traps cold air below the level of the interior, keeping the inside warm. As you move through the tunnel, you feel the temperature change. Outside, impossible cold, breath freezing in the air, the stars so bright they cast faint shadows. Inside the tunnel, less cold, the smell of bodies and cooking and lamp oil. And then you emerge into the kagak itself. It is larger than you expected. The snow walls arch overhead in a perfect dome, each block of snow cut and shaped and fitted with the kind of precision that takes years to learn. Where the blocks meet, there is a thin line of packed snow, and the whole structure is held together by the principle of the arch, each block pressing against its neighbors, the whole supporting itself. The walls glow faintly from the outside, the moonlight or starlight filtering through the snow itself, giving the interior a dim, diffuse light. But the main light comes from the quilik. The quilik is the stone lamp. It is a marvel of simple engineering, a flat stone, shaped like a crescent or half-moon, with a wick of dried moss or lichen along one edge and seal oil or whale oil filling the bowl. When lit, the quilik burns with a steady, warm flame, not bright but consistent, and the oil it burns is a form of stored summer, the fat of the animals that fed well in the open water season, now releasing that stored energy as light and heat through the deep winter. The quilik is tended by women. Learning to manage a quilik, to keep the flame at the right height, neither too high, which wastes oil and produces soot, nor too low, which fails to give adequate warmth or light, is a skill that requires years of practice. A well-tended quilik burns with a long, even, slightly orange flame that produces almost no smoke. A poorly tended one sputters and smokes and frustrates everyone in the room. On this evening, the quilik burns steadily. The people are gathered. Families have come from across the local area, some from nearby camps, some who have traveled longer distances for this gathering. They sit on the sleeping platform that runs around the inside of the kagak, pressed close together for warmth, wearing the inner layer of their clothing. The outer parka is left near the entrance, since inside it is warm enough to be uncomfortable in full winter clothing. Children run in the central space, which is kept clear. Older children have found positions near the edges where they can watch the adults with the particular focused attention of children who sense that something important is about to happen. Someone begins to drum. The Inuit drum, the kilaut, is a large flat drum, made of a thin membrane, traditionally of seal stomach or bladder, or the skin of certain birds, stretched across a wooden or bone frame. It is struck not on the membrane itself, but on the frame, the vibration traveling through the wood and into the membrane, producing a deep resonant sound that fills the snow dome with something warm and rhythmic. The drummer moves as he plays, not wildly, but with a steady rocking motion, the whole body contributing to the rhythm, the drum held out in front and struck in a pattern that is both regular and subtly varied. The sound bounces off the snow walls and fills the space completely, so that you feel it as much as hear it. And then someone begins to sing. Inuit throat singing, kadajak, is something that does not sound like most music you have heard if you have not heard it. It is performed by two people, usually women, standing close together, face to face, sometimes touching at the forehead. Each person sings rhythmic patterns, not melodies in the conventional sense, but sequences of sounds, breaths, vowels, consonants that lock together in complex interlocking rhythms. One person's pattern fills the gaps in the others. Together, they create something larger than either could make alone. The sound is extraordinary, layered, rhythmic, somewhere between music and breath, intimate and ancient at once. In competitions, the throat singing continues until one person breaks rhythm or begins to laugh. The laughing is not failure. The laughing is part of it, the release of the tension that builds as the patterns grow more complex, and the proximity to the other person becomes almost comically intimate. But tonight, the throat singing is not a competition. It is part of the gathering's music, woven together with the drum, filling the snow dome with sound while outside the stars burn cold and the Arctic wind moves across the tundra. After the music, the stories. The Inuit have a vast tradition of storytelling. Across the Arctic territories, there are stories associated with places, with animals, with the seasons, with the relationships between humans and the more than human world. These stories go by various names in various Inuit languages. In some traditions, they're called Unipkak, the ancient stories, the ones that happened long ago, distinct from the personal narratives of recent events, which are their own category. One of the great themes of Arctic storytelling is the relationship between humans and animals. In the Inuit worldview, as it is understood through many generations of oral tradition, animals are not simply resources or background characters. They are people of a different kind. They have their own societies, their own feelings, their own inner lives. When a hunter kills a seal, he is entering into a relationship with that seal, and the relationship requires behavior on his part, respect, gratitude, proper handling of the animal's body, or the seals will stop offering themselves to hunters. This is not merely a story. It is the organizing principle of a way of life in which every meal depends on the willingness of the animals to be taken. A story might be told this way, and let us hear it in the voice of an elder, speaking slowly, letting each image form before moving to the next. There was a young hunter. He was a good hunter, skilled with the harpoon, patient on the ice, but he was careless with the animals he took. He did not thank them properly. He did not return their bones to the water. He did not observe the rules his grandmother had taught him. One day he went out alone on the sea ice. The weather was clear and the seal-breathing holes were numerous, and he caught many seals, more than he needed, more than he could carry, and he left some where they lay and walked home feeling proud of himself. That night he dreamed. In the dream he was walking underwater. The water was not dark and cold as he had imagined it. It was warm and green and full of light, and all around him were the seals, swimming in their hundreds, their dark eyes watching him, and they began to speak. They asked him why he had left their brothers on the ice. They asked him if he knew what it meant to give your life to feed someone and then be left in the snow like something worthless. They were not angry in the dream. They were something quieter than angry. They were disappointed, and somehow that was worse. The hunter woke up in the cold dark of the igloo and lay very still, listening to his wife's breathing, listening to the wind outside. In the morning he went back to the ice and found the seals he had left, now frozen solid. He brought them home. He thanked them. He returned their bones to the water. He did not catch a single seal for 2 weeks after that. But when the seals came back, they came in greater numbers than before. The story is told and the room is quiet for a moment after, the kind of quiet that means the story has done what it was meant to do. It has landed. Children who were still awake when the story began are now fighting sleep with the dogged determination of children everywhere who do not want to miss what is happening. Their eyes close and open and close again. Their bodies lean against the nearest adult, finding warmth in the particular comfort of a solid body nearby. The quilik burns steady and low. Someone adds a piece of dried moss to the wick, adjusting the flame. The light shifts slightly, and the shadows on the snow walls move. In the Arctic winter, the Kagik gathering might last many hours. There is not much else to do. The weather outside is not inviting. The community has come together, and it will stay together for as long as it serves everyone to do so. Stories follow stories. Songs follow stories. Games follow songs. There are competitive games played in the Kagik, contests of strength and skill and endurance that are part sport and part ceremony. But eventually the children are sleeping, most of them curled against their parents on the platform, warm inside their clothing, their breathing slow and even. And eventually the adults, too, begin to tire. The gathering disperses slowly. There is no sharp ending to these evenings, no signal that the night is over. People simply begin to drift back to their own igloo, pulling on their outer parkas at the entrance, stepping out into the cold and the star blaze of the Arctic night, walking the short distance across the snow to their own home. Inside the family igloo, which is small, beautifully small, just large enough for a family to live in, the sleeping platform covered with layers of caribou skins, the children are already asleep. The mother tends the small quilik that burns in the igloo, keeping the flame at just the right height. The father checks the tunnel entrance for drifting snow, checks the outside of the igloo for any structural concerns, performs the small maintenance that keeps the snow house intact, and then they too lie down. The igloo is warm, not sweating in summer warm, but the particular warmth of a space exactly calibrated to the human body, slightly above comfortable, enough to allow sleep without fear of freezing. The caribou skins beneath them are the finest insulation in the world, the hollow shafted hairs trapping air, the accumulated warmth of the body reflecting back from every surface. Outside, the tundra is absolutely silent. The wind may have stopped, or it may be murmuring, a sound so constant it becomes indistinguishable from silence. The stars are so bright and so numerous they give a faint light to the snow, just enough to see shapes by. And the family sleeps in their snow house at the top of the world, and the quilik burns with its steady orange flame, and the stories they heard tonight are settling into the dark corners of their dreams. and the seals are somewhere beneath the ice in their own world, going about their own lives, and the night is very long and very quiet and very old. And as the night deepens, let us pause here, halfway through our first great quiet, and simply breathe. The fire is still burning. The stars are still there. The world is still being held. We have more to visit, more fires to find, more voices to hear. Rest if you need to rest. The story will be here. The weaving of days, Navajo, Dene, people of the American Southwest, the loom at the center of the world. Let us move south. From the Arctic's impossible cold to a different kind of landscape entirely, the Colorado Plateau. The high desert of the American Southwest, where the land is red and gold and lavender all at once, where the sky is so wide it seems to encompass more than sky should rightfully be able to hold, where the mesas rise like great flat altars, and the canyons cut so deep into the earth that the bottom is a different world than the top, a world of shadow and ancient stone, and the sound of water that has been flowing longer than the human record of it. This is Dineta. The homeland of the Dene, the people known more widely by the Tewa word Navajo. The Dene have been in this country for a very long time, though the question of exactly how long is complicated by both archaeology and by the Dene's own traditions, which locate their origins not in a migration from elsewhere, but in an emergence from within the earth itself. Through a series of worlds stacked beneath this one, through a progression of lives and transformations, the Dene emerged into this, the glittering world, which is the name for the world we inhabit now. In the middle of this world, there is a mountain. Actually, there are 4 sacred mountains, marking the 4 directions, defining the boundaries of Dene Biktia, the Navajo homeland. But at the center of the world, at the place where all directions meet, there is a loom. The loom belongs to Spider Woman. Spider Woman is one of the most important figures in Dene tradition. She's not simply a character in a story. She is a teacher, a creator, a presence whose influence runs through the entire fabric of Dene life in a way that is almost literally true. Because Spider Woman taught the people to weave. The origin of weaving in Dene tradition is not simply a practical origin. It is not a story about someone inventing a technology. It is a story about the world being structured, about the fundamental pattern underlying all visible things. Spider Woman showed the people that everything is connected, everything is woven. The relationships between people in the land, between people and the holy beings, between the past and the future, all of it is woven together, and what you do to one thread affects every other thread. This is not metaphor exactly, or rather, it is metaphor that is also true. Both things at once. Let us sit with the Dene family in the 19th century, before the catastrophe of the Long Walk, before the world was torn and reknit in painful ways. Let us find them in their hogan on an autumn evening. The hogan. The traditional Dene hogan is a building of elegant simplicity. The round hogan, the kind most associated with Dene tradition, is built with a framework of logs or large branches covered with earth. The dome shape is created by stacking and corbelling the logs inward until they meet at the top, where a smoke hole is left. The outside is plastered with mud, which dries hard and provides excellent insulation against both heat and cold. The door traditionally faces east, toward the rising sun, toward blessing, toward the renewal that comes every morning. Inside, the hogan is a single circular room. The fire is at the center, directly beneath the smoke hole. Around the perimeter, sleeping areas are arranged. Each family member has their place, and the arrangement follows traditional guidelines about who sleeps where, guidelines that are both practical, children near the parents, elders in the honored position, and spiritually meaningful. On the western side of the hogan, in the honored position, there may be a loom. The weaving loom used in Dene tradition is a vertical loom, a frame of wood with the warp threads stretched from top to bottom vertical. The weaver works from the bottom up, passing the weft threads horizontally through the warp, pushing each row down tightly with a comb-like tool. The design emerges from the bottom, building upward, existing first in the mind of the weaver and then, thread by thread, in the textile itself. Navajo textiles are extraordinary objects. They are extraordinary in their technical complexity. The patterns involve interlocking geometric shapes, the careful counting of threads, the precise placement of color transitions, all done without a written pattern or a graphed design. The pattern exists in the weaver's mind and hands. A skilled weaver carries dozens of active designs simultaneously, keeping track of where each color thread currently is, how many threads have been counted, where the next shift needs to happen. And they are extraordinary in their meaning. The patterns woven into Dene textiles are not merely decorative. They are relationships between colors, between directions, between the sacred and the everyday. A blanket might embody the 4 sacred mountains. A rug might map the journey between worlds. A weaving might hold within it the shape of a song, a prayer, a way of understanding the structure of reality. There is a concept in Dene philosophy, hajo, which is often translated as beauty, but which encompasses much more than beauty as we typically use the word. Hajo is beauty in the sense of right relationship, of balance, of everything being in its proper place and in right relationship with everything else. It is a state of the world, and also a state of the person, and also a state of the relationship between the person and the world. Health and beauty and harmony and rightness are, in this view, not separate things. They are all expressions of Hajo. To weave is to create Hajo. To tell a story is to create Hajo. To walk in a good way through the world, to treat people well, to honor the land, to observe the ceremonies is to maintain Hajo. And when Hajo is broken by illness, by conflict, by neglect of the ceremonies, by contact with dangerous forces, it must be restored. This restoration happens through ceremony, through song, through prayer, through healing rituals. But it also happens through stories. On this autumn evening, the desert is cooling rapidly as it always does, the sky going through its colors, orange, then pink, then purple, then the deep blue that is its last act before becoming night. The stars appear from west to east, the brightest ones first, then the dimmer ones, until the whole sky is full of them. Inside the hogan, the fire is lit. The wood is juniper and pinyon pine, both of which grow in the canyon country, and both of which burn with a particular aromatic quality, releasing volatile oils that give the smoke a sharp, resinous smell. Pinyon smoke in particular has a sweetness to it, a quality that people who grew up in this country and then left it say is the smell of home more than any other smell, the smell that, encountered decades later in some unexpected place, can bring the entire world of childhood back in an instant. The grandmother is weaving. She does not stop when the stories begin. Her hands continue moving, the shuttle passing through the warp, the comb pressing the weft into place. Her eyes move between the textile and the room. She is doing two things at once, and both of them are natural. The story she tells tonight might be about Coyote. Coyote appears in the traditions of many indigenous peoples of the American West and Southwest, and in many of them he occupies a similar role, the trickster. The one who is clever and foolish in equal measure, who overreaches and gets into trouble, who causes chaos that somehow accidentally results in something good or doesn't, and the lesson is in the failure. Coyote stories are funny. This is important. They are not solemn. They are not reverential. They are stories told with a kind of warm, inclusive laughter that brings the audience in, that makes the listener feel that they too have been as foolish as Coyote. That foolishness is not a condemnation but a condition. A Coyote story might begin like this. Coyote was walking along, as Coyote always is, always walking, always looking around with his clever yellow eyes for something interesting, something to eat, something to cause trouble with, when he came to a place where some prairie dogs were having a dance. The prairie dogs were very happy. They were singing their prairie dog songs and dancing their prairie dog dances and having an excellent time among themselves. Coyote watched from a distance. He wanted to join the dance, but he knew the prairie dogs would run into their burrows the moment they saw him, because prairie dogs and coyotes have a complicated relationship that generally ends badly for the prairie dog, so Coyote thought. And when Coyote thinks, you can tell his tail goes still, which it almost never does, and his ears come forward and his nose points, and he gets a look in his eyes that you might describe as calculating. He thought of a plan, and here the grandmother pauses. The children look up from whatever they were doing. One was playing with a small carved figure of a horse. Another was braiding a piece of cord. They look up because the pause is part of the story. The pause is where you are supposed to feel the waiting, to wonder what the plan is. And then the grandmother tells the plan. And it is, of course, a terrible plan. The kind of plan that sounds clever but has an obvious flaw that Coyote, in his cleverness, cannot see because he is blinded by his own cleverness. And the story proceeds to its inevitable outcome, which is Coyote running away from an angry group of prairie dogs, having failed completely in his scheme, and also having somehow disrupted something in the process, knocked over a landmark, rerouted a small stream, created a new feature of the landscape through pure incompetence, and Coyote is last seen loping away over the next hill, already forgetting what happened, already looking for the next interesting thing. The children laugh. The grandmother smiles, not pausing in her weaving, and somewhere in the story is a small truth about not overreaching, about respecting the boundaries of others, about the way that excessive cleverness without wisdom leads to chaos. But the truth is not stated. It is woven into the story the way the pattern is woven into the blanket, present in every thread, visible only when you step back and look at the whole. The fire settles. A log shifts, releasing a small eruption of sparks that float upward toward the smoke hole and vanish. The night outside the hogan is very still. The stars are out in their fullness. The great flat top of a distant mesa is visible in the starlight, its edge sharp against the sky. Somewhere out there, Coyote is walking, always walking. The grandmother's hands keep moving. The pattern grows row by row from the bottom of the loom upward. Thread by thread, the design comes into being. And the children's eyes grow heavy, and the fire burns, and the hogan holds them, and the night is full of stars. The river people, Amazon Basin, Brazil, where the forest has no edge, and as the night deepens, let us go to water. South now and east into the enormous green lungs of the world. Into the Amazon Basin, where the rivers are so numerous and so wide that the landscape from above looks less like land with water in it and more like water with land in it. A world organized around the flow of water, where the river is not merely a feature of the environment but its primary road, its main street, its organizing principle. The Amazon River itself, at its widest, is so broad that standing on one bank you cannot see the other. In the rainy season, it floods so extensively that fish swim through the forests, among the trees, through spaces that in the dry season are dry land. The Várzea, the seasonally flooded forest, is a world that shifts between states, that is sometimes above water and sometimes below it, and the creatures who live there have adapted to both. The indigenous peoples of the Amazon are, like the peoples of Australia, not one group but hundreds. There are more than 400 distinct indigenous nations in the Brazilian Amazon alone, speaking hundreds of different languages, practicing traditions that are each distinct. Many of these nations have maintained continuous traditions in this forest for thousands of years. Some have had virtually no contact with the outside world until the 20th century or later. We are going to sit with the Yaounapé people, a name I have given to a composite community that draws on elements of several Amazonian traditions. To honor these traditions without claiming specific authority, I do not possess. The details we will encounter are drawn from the documented traditions of multiple Amazonian peoples. The village sits on a bank of a wide river tributary, the kind of river that is brown with dissolved tannins from the forest, slow-moving, deep, reflecting the trees on its banks so perfectly that looking at the reflection is like looking into another forest, an upside-down world, slightly darker, the details softened by the movement of the water. The houses are built on poles above the ground, not for fear of flooding, though flooding is a consideration, but also for practical reasons of airflow, and for the simple reason that the raised floor creates a space beneath the house where animals can shelter, tools can be stored, and children can play in shade during the hottest hours of the afternoon. The walls are woven palm fronds, split and woven in interlocking patterns, flexible enough to breathe air through in the heat, substantial enough to provide privacy and shade. The roof is thatch, many layers deep, so thick that even in the heaviest Amazonian rain, and the rain here can be extraordinary vertical walls of water that seem to erase the landscape, that turn the river brown with runoff and fill the air with a roar of water on leaves. Even in this rain, the inside stays dry, and the sound of the rain on the thatch roof is the most comforting sound imaginable. Let us say it is the dry season. In the dry season, the Amazon basin reveals land that was hidden by the floods. The river drops, exposing sandy beaches along its banks, long white beaches of fine sand that appear and disappear with the seasons. The people use these beaches for fishing, for gathering, for the drying of food, for the ceremonies that are associated with this season. But in the evening, the beach is quiet. The fishing boats dug out canoes, some of them very large, carved from single enormous logs with patient work over many weeks, are pulled up on the sand. The paddles are stored. The nets are mended, spread out on wooden frames to dry, their mesh holding the last drops of river water, glinting in the low light. In the village, the fires are lit. The smell of the evening in an Amazonian village is something very particular. Wood smoke, yes, but also the smell of the river, which has its own character, dark and organic and slightly sweet. The smell of things growing and decomposing and growing again in perpetual cycling. The smell of cooked fish and manioc, the starchy root that forms the dietary foundation of life in much of the Amazon, manioc flour, manioc bread, manioc paste. These things are present everywhere, their particular flavor somewhere between bread and earth. The manioc processing is itself an art. The root is poisonous in its raw form. It contains cyanide compounds that must be removed before the root can be eaten. The process of making manioc safe, grating the raw root, then pressing it in a long cylindrical basket press that squeezes out the poisonous juice, then heating the dried pulp to drive off any remaining compounds. This process was worked out through careful observation and experimentation by the peoples who domesticated this plant thousands of years ago. And the juice itself, the poisonous juice, has uses. Heated to drive off the cyanide, it becomes a sauce, a complex, slightly sweet, slightly bitter seasoning that is used in cooking. Nothing is wasted. In the village, as the evening deepens, people gather in the large communal house, the maloca, which is not merely a dwelling but the center of community life. The maloca is enormous by the standards of most traditional architecture, 50 meters long, 30 meters wide, a single great interior space with a vaulted roof of thatch so high above the floor that the upper reaches disappear into shadow even in the daytime. This space is simultaneously a house, a meeting hall, a ceremonial space, a storage facility, and a theater. On the roof beams, dozens of things hang: smoked fish, dried fruit, braided bundles of herbs and roots used in medicine, the feathered regalia of ceremonies, wrapped carefully in bark cloth when not in use, tools, weapons, nets, string bags, a complete inventory of material life suspended from the ceiling in organized chaos. On the floor, the hammocks. Hammock, which originated in the Americas, among its many contributions to the world, is the sleeping technology of the Amazon, and it is brilliantly suited to its environment. The hammock keeps the sleeper above the ground, away from the insects and reptiles that move through the forest floor at night. It swings gently, creating a constant slight breeze that makes the humid tropical night bearable. It takes up almost no space when not in use, folding and hanging from a single hook, and it rocks. The rocking of a hammock is, in its own quiet way, one of the most universally soothing sensations available to a human body. There is something about the gentle swing of it, the rhythm matching, almost, the rhythm of walking, that relaxes the body in a way that lying still on a flat surface does not quite achieve. Children in hammocks fall asleep faster than children on flat beds, in many observations. Adults, too. This evening the hammocks are strung in their places, and the fire burns in the central hearth, and the children who are not yet sleeping are watching the adults, who are doing the thing that signals the evening has properly begun. Someone has brought out the instruments. Music in Amazonian traditions is varied and remarkable. There are flutes of bone and wood and bamboo, some played with the nose rather than the mouth, producing a soft, airy sound. There are rattles of various kinds, seeds inside gourds, shells strung together, the dried wing cases of beetles. There are drums, and there are the voices, human voice as instrument. In many Amazonian traditions, there are songs that are not songs in the way we usually mean the word. They are something more specific, icaros in the traditions of many Amazonian healing traditions, which is close to but distinct from the healing traditions of the Yawanappi. Songs that belong to specific plants, specific animals, specific spirits. Songs that are received rather than composed, that come to the singer in dreams or in ceremony, that encode relationships and knowledge and power that the song itself transmits when properly sung. A grandmother might sing one of these songs tonight. Her voice is not operatic. It is not trained in the way that a classical singer is trained. But it has a quality that is difficult to describe, a certainty, a groundedness, a sense that the voice comes from somewhere deep in the body and moves outward without friction. The melody is not complex, a few notes repeated in patterns, with variations that the listener gradually begins to anticipate, that create a kind of call and response between the melody and its own expectation. The melody circles. It goes around and comes back to itself. This is characteristic of many traditional songs, not a beginning middle end structure, but a circular structure, a spiral, a pattern that returns to its starting point and then continues past it, making another loop. The children in their hammocks slow, the fire burns. The river outside moves in its dark, patient way, carrying whatever the forest puts into it, fallen leaves, seeds, small insects, the dark filtered water of 1,000 tributaries, carrying it all toward the sea, a journey of thousands of kilometers that the water does not experience as a journey, because it has no experience of beginnings and endings, only of flowing. There are stories in the Amazon about the river. Not about rivers in the abstract, but about this specific river, this specific tributary, the one visible and audible from this specific village. About the beings who live in it, not fish, but spirit beings who take animal form, who interact with the human world in ways that are sometimes helpful and sometimes dangerous, and always requiring of respectful attention. The boto, the pink river dolphin, is one of these. In the traditions of many Amazonian peoples, the boto is a transformer, a being that can shift between dolphin form and human form, that appears in villages at night in the shape of a handsome young man or a beautiful young woman, wearing a hat to conceal the breathing hole on the top of its head. The boto in human form might attend a village celebration, might dance and laugh and flirt, might leave before dawn without explanation. To meet a boto in human form is a complicated thing. It's not inherently dangerous, but it requires care, because the boto's world and the human world are adjacent but not the same, and spending too much time in contact with the boto's world can make a person gradually less present in their own. A story about the boto might be told like this. There was a young man who was a very good fisherman, patient, skilled, who knew the river the way you know the inside of your own house, who could read the surface of the water and tell you where the fish were hiding below. One evening after a particularly long day on the river, he was making his way home when he heard music on the bank. Not the music of his village, that music he would have recognized. This was different, lighter, more intricate, and when he pulled his canoe to the bank and walked toward the sound, he found a celebration he had not known about, people he did not recognize, dancing in the clearing, a fire burning, food on the banks. He joined the celebration. It was beautiful. The music was beautiful, the food was unlike anything he had tasted, the people were warm and welcoming, and he danced until very late. In the morning, he was in his canoe. The sun was already high. His fishing equipment was where he had left it. The bank where the celebration had been was empty. There was no sign a fire had ever been lit there. No ash, no worn ground, nothing. He went home and said nothing about it, but for a while after that, the river seemed different to him, more present. More alive, he fished well, better than ever even. The fish seemed to come to him more readily. He never saw the celebration again. But sometimes at dusk, when the river was very still and the light was going out of the sky, he thought he could hear very faintly from somewhere beneath the water the same music. The grandmother who has been telling this story lets it end there. No explanation, no moral stated, just the fisherman at dusk and the music below the surface. The children are mostly sleeping. The hammocks swing gently in the warm night air that moves through the gaps in the woven walls. The fire has burned down. The maloka is dim and warm and full of the breathing of sleeping people. Outside, the river moves. The tree frogs are calling, a layered, complex chorus that will continue all night, each species occupying its own frequency, so that the whole becomes a kind of music of its own, a music that has been playing in this forest since long before there were people to hear it. The stars are not visible here, hidden by the canopy above the clearing, but they are there. They are always there. The hammock rocks. The music far below the surface continues. And the night is warm and the forest is alive in its patient, enormous way, and the world is not separate from the story told about it. The talking circles plains nations, North American Great Plains, when the prairie is the sky upside down, and as the night deepens, let us travel again, north and west, out of the forests and into the open. The Great Plains of North America are not nothing, though to someone who has grown up in a landscape of trees and hills and enclosure, the first encounter with the plains can feel like stepping into a painting that someone forgot to finish. The sky is so large here it seems impossible. It wraps from horizon to horizon and then keeps going, curving overhead, the clouds moving through it with a scale and speed that makes you feel small in a way that is not unpleasant but is undeniable. The grass is vast. Or it was vast in the time we are visiting, in the period before the systematic disruption of the 19th century, when the buffalo herds were still present in numbers almost impossible to describe. Estimates suggest that, before the commercial hunting of the 1800s, there were between 30 and 60 million bison on the plains. 60 million large animals, each one weighing between 400 and 900 kilograms, moving across a grassland that stretched from Texas to Canada. When a large herd moved, it was audible from miles away. The ground vibrated. The dust rose in a column visible from enormous distances, and the sound, a low, sustained rumble like distant thunder that does not stop, was the sound of the plains in their fullness, the sound of the ecosystem operating at its intended scale. The nations of the plains, the Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Comanche, the Crow, the Blackfoot, and many others, organized their lives around the bison. Not exclusively, there were other foods, other resources, complex trade networks, but the bison was the center, not just economically but spiritually. The relationship between the plains peoples and the bison was not a simple resource relationship. It was a relationship between nations. Let us find a Lakota camp on a summer evening. The tipi, spelled tipi here, as many Lakota speakers prefer, though the word appears in many variants, is an extraordinary structure. It looks simple from the outside, a cone of poles covered with tan bison hide, a smoke flap at the top, a door flap at the bottom. But the engineering is precise and sophisticated. The poles are arranged not in a simple cone, but in a specific pattern. 3 or 4 foundation poles create the base structure. Then the remaining poles, 12 to 20, depending on the tipi's size, are leaned into the first. The angles are calculated to create a structure that is stable in the wind, which on the plains can be severe, and that allows the smoke to vent properly even when the wind changes direction. The cover is made of tan bison hide, typically 12 to 20 hides for a family tipi, sewn together with sinew in a precise pattern and stretched over the poles. Hide is smoke tanned, a process in which the fresh hide is worked extensively to break down the fibers and make it soft, then smoked over a fire of specific woods, which gives it a rich golden brown color and a quality it can get wet and dry without becoming stiff that untanned leather does not possess. Inside, the tipi is beautiful. The liner, a separate piece of tanned hide hung inside the tipi at head height, creates a dead airspace between itself and the outer cover, providing insulation. It also creates the airflow system that makes the tipi breathable. Cool air enters at the bottom between the liner and the outer cover, rises, helps draw the smoke from the central fire up and out through the smoke flaps. On the liner, there may be paintings. Tipi paintings are a tradition that varies between plains nations, but in many traditions, the owner of the tipi has the right, and sometimes the obligation, to paint significant events on the liner or the exterior. Battle honors, vision experiences, significant hunts. The paintings are done in mineral pigments, red ochre, black from charcoal, white from clay, yellow from certain earths, mixed with bison fat and applied with brushes of various sizes and materials. A tipi with elaborate painted decoration is a record. It is biography and history and spiritual statement, all painted on the skin of the animal that made the whole life possible. This evening, the tipi is warm. The fire at the center burns with dry bison chips, the dried dung of the bison, which burns hot and nearly smokeless, the ideal fuel of the grassland where wood is scarce. The smell of bison chip smoke is its own thing, earthy, slightly sweet in a way that is not quite like anything else. The family inside is preparing for the evening. Food has been eaten, dried bison meat reconstituted in a stew with prairie turnips, and perhaps some dried berries, eaten from a common vessel, each person with their own wooden or horn spoon. After eating, there is the quiet time, and then from the camp outside, a signal: the elder is ready to speak. There is a gathering not dramatic, not announced with great formality, just the natural gravity of an elder who is known to be a good storyteller drawing people toward him the way a warm fire draws people on a cool evening. Adults drift in from their own tippies. Children come first, because children always come first to where the interesting things are happening. The elder sits in the honored position, the west side of the circle, facing the door, which faces east. The fire is between him and the entrance. Around him, arranged in the informal but meaningful pattern of a community that knows its own geography, people settle. Some bring their work, women beating moccasins, working the tiny glass or shell or quillwork beads in the intricate geometric patterns that cover everything beautiful in this world, the needle moving through the hide with a sureness that comes from years of practice. Men checking the fletching on arrows, the binding on a lance, the edge on a knife. The work does not interrupt the listening. It accompanies it, and the elder begins. In the Lakota tradition and many related Plains traditions, stories are separated into two categories. There are the instructive stories, the everyday narratives, the accounts of what happened last week or last season. And there are the Wikohan, the sacred narratives, the stories that carry the weight of origin and teaching. Among the most sacred of these is the story of White Buffalo Calf Woman. She came from the horizon, walking. That is how it always begins. Two scouts were out on the plains, looking for game, and they saw something coming from a great distance, a figure walking. As it came closer, they saw it was a woman, dressed in white buckskin so perfect it seemed to glow, carrying a bundle wrapped in sage. One of the scouts saw only a beautiful woman and thought inappropriate thoughts. He was immediately killed by a cloud of smoke, or in some tellings, consumed by insects. The story varies, but the consequence is clear. You do not bring desire to the sacred. You bring reverence. The other scout recognized what he was seeing. He stood still and waited. He lowered his eyes. She told him to go ahead, to prepare his people, to tell them to make ready a lodge for her arrival. She had something to give them. When she arrived at the camp, she brought with her the most sacred object of the Lakota people, the chinunpa, the sacred pipe. She taught them how to use it, how it connected the user to all of creation, how the smoke carried prayers upward, how smoking together was a sacred act that bound people to each other and to the holy. She taught them 7 sacred rites, and then she walked back toward the horizon, and as she walked, she transformed, turning first into a black buffalo, then a red one, then a yellow one, then finally a white buffalo calf, gleaming and impossible against the green of the prairie grass, and she was gone. The pipe remained, and the ceremonies she gave them remained, and the stories told about her remained, told and retold in tippies on summer evenings and winter nights for generations upon generations, each telling slightly different, each teller finding their own way into the story, their own emphasis, their own pace. The elder telling this story tonight speaks slowly. There is no hurry. The stars are just becoming visible through the smoke flap at the top of the tippy. The fire burns. The needle moves through the hide. The children are very still, their eyes wide. The plains outside are quiet. Somewhere distant, the camp's horses move through the grass. Somewhere more distant, a coyote. And beyond the coyote, the enormous silent prairie, the grass moving in the wind in waves that look like water, the horizon curved and infinite. The story of White Buffalo Calf Woman is not just about a sacred visitor. It is about the structure of the world. About the relationship between humans and animals, specifically between the Lakota people and the buffalo, who are people of a different kind, who have their own ways and their own dignity, and who offer themselves to the human people when treated with proper respect. The white buffalo is the rarest of all buffaloes. White coloring is caused by a genetic variation that appears rarely in the wild. When a white buffalo calf was born, it was treated as a sign of enormous spiritual significance. In very recent history, white buffalo calves born on farms have been treated with the same reverence. The story connects the extraordinary to the ordinary. The sacred visitor brought ceremonies, specific, teachable, repeatable ceremonies, and left. But the ceremony stayed, the pipe stayed, the relationship they created stayed, and so the extraordinary became embedded in the everyday. The sacred did not remain separate from the world. It was woven into the life of the people, into the smoke that rises from the pipe, into the way you behave toward the animals you hunt, into the stories told by firelight on summer evenings. The children are sleeping now, most of them, curled close to their parents or grandparents, nestled into the furs and robes that cover the ground. Their breathing is slow and even. Their eyes move slightly beneath their lids. Somewhere in their dreams, perhaps, a white figure walks toward the horizon and becomes a calf, and the calf runs, and the prairie opens to receive it. The fire burns lower. The elder has been quiet for some time. Not everything needs to end with a statement. Outside, the prairie is breathing in its slow, grassy way, and the stars are absolutely still above the moving grass, and the bison somewhere out there in the dark move and breathe and are themselves, enormous and ancient and wholly at home. And as the night deepens further, let us rest for a moment in the traveling itself. Between chapters, between continents, there is a passage, a transition, the comfortable movement of a story that knows where it is going and is in no hurry to get there. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. Feel the steady rhythm of your breathing. There are more stories to find, more fires, more voices, and all of them in their own way are saying the same quiet thing: you are not alone in the dark. The keeper of stories, West African griot tradition, when the history lives in the voice. Meanwhile, in another quiet corner of history, let us cross an ocean. Africa, West Africa. The savanna lands south of the Sahara, where the landscape opens into rolling grasslands punctuated by enormous trees, the baobab especially, whose trunk is so wide and whose silhouette is so distinctive that it looks like the tree is growing upside down, its roots in the air, its branches underground. The baobab can live for thousands of years. There are individual trees alive today that were already ancient when Columbus crossed the Atlantic. Standing beside one is an exercise in humility that is also somehow an exercise in comfort. This tree has seen so much, and it is still here, and the world is still turning. In the West African cultural tradition that we are going to visit tonight, there is a figure as essential to the community as the elder, the chief, the healer, the farmer. This figure is the griot. The word griot, borrowed from French and used widely in English, is an approximation for a role that goes by many names in different languages and cultures. Jelly in Mande languages, Jewel in Wolof, Jolly in Gambian Mandinka. But the role broadly described is this. The griot is the keeper of history, the professional storyteller and singer, the genealogist, the praise singer, the social commentator, the keeper of names and dates and events that, in a society without extensive written records, must be carried in a human mind if they are to be carried at all. In some traditions, griots form their own hereditary caste. You are born a griot or you are not, and the training begins in childhood. In others, the role is more fluid. But in many West African societies, the griot is indispensable to public life in ways that might surprise a culture that has outsourced its memory to paper and ink and electronic storage. At a wedding, the griot sings the family's praises, tracing their genealogies, linking the new couple to the great figures of the past. At a funeral, the griot speaks the person's history, ensures that the life is properly witnessed and recorded in the living memory of the community. At a political gathering, the griot advises the chief, drawing on knowledge of historical precedent that no single person could be expected to carry without years of dedicated training. Let us imagine an evening in a village in the Sahel region, that transitional zone between the Sahara Desert to the north and the wetter savanna to the south, sometime in the 18th century, or perhaps the 17th. The harmattan has been blowing for weeks, the dry wind from the northeast that brings fine Saharan dust, hazing the air, drying everything, filling the mouth with a faint earthy taste that is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, but simply present. The village is a cluster of compounds, each compound an enclosed space of several round mud brick houses surrounding a shared courtyard, the whole compound bounded by a low mud wall. The roofs of the houses are coned thatch. The walls are smooth, sun-baked mud plaster, pale ochre, the same color as the earth they were made from. In the communal space, the center of the village, where the great silk cotton tree provides shade, the evening gathering is forming. The silk cotton tree, Ceiba pentandra, is a massive tree, its trunk buttressed by great fins of wood that spread from the base, its canopy spreading wide. In many West African traditions, the silk cotton tree is the home of spirits, a sacred tree, to be treated with respect, never cut for wood. It is planted or grows naturally at the center of settlements because it marks the meeting place of worlds. Beneath this tree, on evenings when the heat of the day has released enough that sitting outside is pleasant, people gather. Stools and low benches carved from wood are brought from the houses. Older people sit, younger people stand or sit on the ground. Children occupy every available surface on the tree roots, on the low wall of the compound across the way, on each other's laps. The griot arrives. In this tradition, the griot's arrival is itself a kind of performance. He is carrying his instrument, the kora, or perhaps the balafon, or the ngoni, depending on the tradition, but let us say the kora. The kora is one of the great instruments of the world. It is a 21-stringed instrument, built from a large calabash gourd covered with cow skin, with a long wooden neck passing through the gourd. The 21 strings are arranged in two planes, like two harps set side by side. The kora is played with both hands, the fingers plucking the strings while the thumbs rest on the sides of the neck for stability. The sound of the kora is like nothing else. It is light and clear and somehow immediately calming. each note pure, the overtones rich, the whole sounding less like a plucked instrument and more like water falling from a height, the natural scatter of droplets that somehow organizes itself into a pattern. The griot begins with instrumental music, no words yet, just the kora, establishing the mood, calling the evening to attention, telling the gathered people that they are being invited into a particular kind of attention. Then the voice. The griot singing is not pretty singing in the conventional sense. It is not smooth or controlled in the way of a trained Western vocalist. It is powerful. It has a roughness at the edges that is not a failure of technique but a feature of it, a quality of truth in the sound, of something that has not been sanitized for presentation. The voice carries. Tonight, the griot sings the history of the village. He begins far back, further back than anyone alive remembers, in the time of the founding of the lineage, the first ancestor who settled in this place. He names the founding ancestor. He describes the journey that brought that ancestor here, not necessarily in the geographic sense, though geography may appear, but in the sense of the trials faced, the choices made, the qualities that distinguished this ancestor from ordinary people. He names the children of that ancestor, and their children. And their children's children. Generation by generation, name by name, the history of the community is sung into being. It is not a dry recitation of names. Each name comes with a quality, a story, a moment. This ancestor was known for his generosity, and the griot illustrates with a story. This ancestor faced a particular challenge, and the griot describes how it was met, and what it cost, and what was gained. The history is alive in the telling. People in the gathering recognize their own names, or rather, they recognize the names of their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents appearing in the griot song, and there is a moment for each of those recognitions. A nod, a smile, the particular pleasure of being placed within a larger story, of having your family confirmed as real and consequential and connected to something older than yourself. For the children in the gathering, this is particularly powerful. The child who hears their great-great-grandmother named in the griot song, who hears a story attached to that name, a quality, a moment of courage or generosity or wisdom, that child has received something. They have received a position in the world. They have received a past that is their own, a history they belong to, ancestors who were specific people with specific qualities rather than a vague, undifferentiated notion of before. This is one of the deepest purposes of the griot tradition, to give children a specific place in a specific history so that they grow up knowing who they are and where they come from. After the family histories, the griot moves into the older stories, the tales that are not family history but common property, stories that everyone knows and that everyone wants to hear again because the hearing is the point, not the novelty. The spider stories. Anansi the spider, the trickster, appears in the traditions of many West African peoples and traveled through the brutal rupture of the Atlantic slave trade to the Caribbean and the Americas, where he became Aunt Nancy in American folklore, where he became the ancestor of Brer Rabbit, where he persisted through an almost incomprehensible historical trauma because the stories were too strong, too essential, too much a part of who the people were, to be taken from them even when everything else was. An Anansi story is a story about cleverness and cunning and the power of the apparently weak to outwit the apparently powerful. Anansi is small. Anansi is often underestimated. And Anansi, through ingenuity and patience and an absolute refusal to accept that the powerful have the right to everything they claim, wins, or doesn't win sometimes. Sometimes Anansi's cleverness overreaches and he is caught in his own web. Those stories, too, are necessary. The griot tells an Anansi story that moves through the gathering like light through leaves, flickering, quick, the laughter coming at the expected moments and then again at unexpected ones. Children who were drowsing are suddenly wide awake, leaning forward. Even the oldest people in the gathering, who have heard this story more times than they can count, laugh at the same places they always laugh, because the story is doing something that goes beyond the information it contains. It is doing something to the body, to the breath, to the way the gathered people feel about being gathered. It is making them a community. This is the political function of the story. Not political in the sense of partisan or divisive, but political in the oldest sense, relating to the polis, the community, the shared life of people who are together in a place. Stories make communities. They give communities a shared vocabulary of reference, a set of common values expressed through common narrative, a sense of being people who know the same things. The harmattan has eased slightly. The evening is cooler. The dust settles. The kora is quiet. The griot drinks water from a gourd, slowly, deliberately, the gesture of someone who has been using their voice and their mind for a long time. Around him, the gathering is beginning to dissolve. Children are being carried home. Adults are rising, exchanging words, moving off toward their compounds, but not quickly. There is no hurry in the dissolving of this kind of gathering. It disintegrates slowly, like the end of a fire, one person at a time. A small conversation here, a laugh there, the last few people reluctant to let the evening fully end. The griot packs away his kora. Tomorrow he will be needed again, perhaps at a family celebration, perhaps to advise a chief, perhaps simply to be present in the way that the griot is always present, the living library, the keeper of the names. But tonight his work is done. The great silk cotton tree stands silent in the center of the village. The stars are beginning to show through the Harmattan haze, not as bright as they would be in clear air, but present. The village is quiet. The compounds are dark. And the history of the village exists in the minds of everyone who heard it tonight, a little more firmly settled, a little more theirs. The Maori night sky, Aotearoa, New Zealand. The stars know where you came from, and as the night deepens, let us sail. Let us cross the Pacific, the largest ocean on Earth, so vast that all the continents could fit inside it with room to spare. The Pacific at night, far from any land, is an experience of almost incomprehensible scale. The water is black and moves in long, slow swells, the horizon invisible, the sky so thick with stars that the line between ocean and sky becomes uncertain. For millennia, the peoples of the Pacific navigated this ocean, not by accident, not by vague drifting on winds and currents. By intention, skill, and a body of navigational knowledge so precise and so comprehensive that it guided people from island to island across thousands of miles of open ocean in outrigger canoes, arriving at specific small islands they had never visited, finding them reliably, returning home. This navigation used the stars, and the waves, and the birds, and the wind, and the color of the water, and the way the swell moves when a distant island is interrupting it. And dozens of other signals, each meaningful, each part of a system of reading the ocean the way the griot reads the history of the community, with a mind trained for years to hold the information, to feel it in the body as much as think it in the head. The navigators of the Pacific made one of the greatest human migrations in history, the settlement of Polynesia. From Southeast Asia, the ancestors of the Polynesian peoples moved east, island by island, generation by generation, until they had reached the most remote habitable places on Earth. Hawaii to the north, Easter Island to the east, and Aotearoa, New Zealand to the south. The Maori people arrived in Aotearoa around 1280 CE, after an extraordinary voyage from eastern Polynesia, across thousands of miles of open ocean, guided by knowledge of stars and currents that they had inherited from generations of navigators before them. Let us find a Maori village in the years before European contact, perhaps in the 15th century. The village, the Kainga, sits on a hillside overlooking a sheltered bay. The bay is deep and blue-green, protected from the open ocean by a headland that curves around it. The water in the bay is calm. Through it you can see the bottom, dark weed, sandy patches, the occasional flash of a fish. The houses of the village are built of totara timber and raupo, the New Zealand bulrush, whose broad flat leaves make excellent thatch. The meeting house, the Woronui, is the spiritual and social center of the community, large and elaborately decorated, its carved facade a visual narrative of the village's genealogy. The carving on a Woronui is extraordinary. Every surface is covered. Wooden panels carved in deep relief, the patterns interlocking in spiraling forms, koru, the unfurling fern frond, pakura, the flowing ancestral line. The figures carved on the interior poles are the tupuna, the ancestors, each one named, each one with a place in the genealogy that the carving embodies. The Woronui is not merely a building, it is a body. Literally, the ridge beam is the ancestor's spine. The rafters are the ribs. The carved figures on the inside are the ancestors' thoughts and experiences, held in the body of the house, surrounding the people who gather inside with the presence of the ancestors. To enter the Woronui is to enter the body of your ancestor, to sleep inside it, as people do on special occasions, on community gatherings, on nights of ceremony, is to sleep inside the protection of the past. On this evening, there is a hui, a gathering in the Woronui. People have come from neighboring settlements, some by canoe, traveling the coastline or the rivers. Connections are maintained between settlements through these gatherings: trade, marriage negotiations, the sharing of information, the reaffirmation of alliances. But tonight the gathering is partly for the purpose of stories. There is a senior tohunga in the village, a specialist in sacred knowledge, a person trained in the war wenanga, the house of learning, from a young age. The war wenanga is not a building in the ordinary sense. It is an institution, a school in effect, where young people with aptitude and the right lineage are trained in the sacred knowledge of the community. The training lasts for years and is rigorous. Not everyone who begins finishes, but those who do carry within them a comprehensive understanding of genealogy, astronomy, sacred history, and the relationships between the human world and the spiritual one. The tohunga begins with genealogy. Wakapapa genealogy is the organizing principle of Maori thought. Not genealogy as a dry list of names, but genealogy as a living map of relationships. The Wakapapa of the Maori people does not begin with humans. It begins at the beginning of everything. It begins with Te Kori, the void, the nothingness, the state before being. From Te Kori comes Te Po, the night, the darkness, the potential. And from Tipo through a long sequence of nights, each one slightly more differentiated than the last, comes the world of light and form and living things. The genealogy does not simply trace the descent of people from other people. It traces the descent of everything from everything. People are descended from gods, who are descended from natural forces, who emerged from the night. Mountains have genealogies. Rivers have genealogies. The forest has a genealogy. The ocean has a genealogy. Everything that exists is connected by descent to everything else. This is not poetry, or rather, it is poetry that is also truth. The Wakapapa is a way of knowing the world in which nothing is isolated, nothing is unconnected, nothing is without ancestors and therefore without meaning. The Tohunga traces the Wakapapa of the village tonight, back through generations. The names come in sequences. This person was the child of these two, who were the children of these four, who traced their lines back to the great navigators who found this island, who themselves traced their lines back to the gods of the ocean, of the sky, of the land. The people in the Warnui listen. Many of them know their own genealogy. Reciting one's genealogy is a basic skill in traditional Maori society, a way of introducing yourself, of establishing who you are in relationship to others. But hearing the Tohunga recite the full Wakapapa of the community, in a formal setting, with the full weight of the occasion, is different. It places each individual within the whole, confirms the relationships, reminds everyone in the room that they are not isolated individuals, but nodes in a web that extends in every direction, backward through time to the beginning of everything, outward through space to every place the ancestors touched. After the genealogy, the stars. Maori navigation depends on a thorough knowledge of the stars, and that knowledge is embedded in stories. Each star or star group has a name, a genealogy of its own, and a story that encodes its behavior, when it rises, where it rises, what its position in the sky means for navigation and for agriculture and for fishing. Madariki, the Pleiades, the star cluster visible in winter in the southern hemisphere, is one of the most important. The rising of Madariki in the northeast before dawn marks the Maori New Year. It is a time of reflection, of acknowledging the dead, of celebrating the harvest, of planning for the year ahead. The stars in Madariki are individual people in the Maori tradition, the children of Tangaroa and others, placed in the sky for reasons that the story tells. Looking at Madariki is not looking at abstract points of light. It is looking at a family, a community, a group of beings who have their own relationships and their own stories. The Tohunga points to the sky through the open door of the Warranui. Madariki is not visible tonight. It is not the right season, but he points to where it will be and traces the path it will travel, and tells the story of why it is there and what it means when it rises, and how the navigator, who is far out on the open ocean in darkness, can use it to know where they are. The children in the Warranui are lying on the mats that cover the floor, wrapped in kakahu, cloaks woven from muka, flax fiber, and sometimes decorated with feathers. The cloaks are warm and the mats are comfortable, and the voice of the Tohunga is deep and steady, and the carved faces of the ancestors look down from the rafters in the soft light of the fire. The child looks up at the carved face of an ancestor. The ancestor is beautiful and fearsome and very old. The tamoko, the carved spiraling patterns on the face, are not decoration. They are identity. They are the encoded story of the person's genealogy, their status, their achievements, their place in the web. The child does not yet know how to read all of the tamoko, but they know they are inside the ancestor's body, protected by the ancestor's presence, surrounded by the stories of all the people who came before. And the stars outside are turning slowly, as they always turn, and somewhere out there on the ocean, a canoe is moving between islands, guided by the knowledge of exactly this, exactly where the stars rise and set, exactly what the swell says about where land lies, exactly how to read the world's face and find your way home. The fire in the Warranui burns low. The Tohunga is quiet. The ancestors watch from the rafters. And the night outside is warm and fragrant with the smell of the ocean and the forest, and Madariki is coming in its own time as it always comes, and the world is very old and very full and the child's eyes have closed. The healing songs, Cherokee Nation, Appalachian Mountains, what the mountain remembers, and as the night deepens, let us return to the Americas, to the mountains this time. The Appalachians, the oldest mountains in North America, so old that they were ancient when the Himalayas were young, worn down over hundreds of millions of years from heights that might once have rivaled the Alps to something gentler, rounder, more like great green waves of stone, covered so completely in forest that the rock itself is rarely visible. In these mountains, in the river valleys, and on the mountain slopes, the Cherokee people built one of the most sophisticated political and cultural systems in pre-contact North America. The Cherokee Tsalagi in their own language were not nomadic. They lived in towns, substantial settlements of several hundred to several thousand people, centered on a council house large enough to hold the whole community. They farmed corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, tobacco. They hunted. They fished the mountain rivers, which were cold and clear and full of trout and other fish. They traded across enormous distances. Cherokee trade goods have been found hundreds of miles from Cherokee territory in all directions, and they had a sophisticated tradition of medicine and healing. Let us find a healer's house on a mountain evening. The house is built of logs, the horizontal log construction that many people associate with the Appalachian frontier, though the Cherokee were doing it long before European contact. The logs are notched at the corners, the gaps between them filled with river clay mixed with grass. The fireplace is stone, built into one wall. The chimney draws well. This house is not smoky. Inside, it is warm. The fire burns with seasoned hardwood, oak mostly, which burns hot and slow, and at the right stage of burning releases very little smoke, just heat and a faint woody fragrance. Bundles hang from the rafters. Herbs, roots, barks, the material of medicine gathered through the seasons and dried and stored here, available when needed. Some of them have smells that are obvious even at a distance. The sharp sweetness of sassafras bark, the deep medicinal bite of wild bergamot, the slightly earthy sweetness of sycamore, the pungent darkness of black cohosh root. Each bundle has a story, not just the story of where it was gathered and how, though that is part of it, because in the Cherokee healing tradition the manner of gathering matters, the words spoken while gathering matter, the relationship between the gatherer and the plant matters. But also the larger story, what this plant is, where it came from, what the first healer was doing when they learned of its use, what it knows that the healer can access through proper relationship. The healer, in this tradition, the person with knowledge of plant medicines and healing songs, has spent years learning. The learning is not merely technical. It is not a list of which plant treats which symptom. It is a deep relational knowledge, the knowledge of a person who has spent so much time with a particular plant that they know its personality, its preferences, its seasons, its quirks, and the healing songs. In Cherokee healing tradition, many healing practices involve singing. The songs are specific. There are songs for specific ailments, songs for specific situations, songs that accompany specific plant medicines. The song and the medicine work together. Neither is complete without the other. The songs are old. In the Cherokee oral tradition, the healing songs were given by the plants themselves, the plants who are beings with knowledge and power who chose to share their gifts with the healers who approached them with proper respect. Let us imagine a healing session, not the crisis kind, not the dramatic healing of someone severely ill, but the quiet kind, the maintenance kind. A child who has had a persistent cough, a grandmother who has been sleeping poorly. The ordinary ailments of ordinary life brought to the healer for attention. The healer receives them in the evening. There is something about evening that suits this work, the day's business winding down, the house quiet, the fire established and steady, the outside world beginning its nightly retreat from the demanding pace of daylight. The healer prepares the medicine slowly. The plant material is selected from the bundles with care, not hurried, not grabbed, but chosen deliberately, each bundle considered, each held briefly and almost consulted before being set aside or selected. Water is heated in a clay pot. The selected plant material is added, bark stripped and bruised, leaves crumbled, roots scraped. The steam rises, carrying the plant's essence into the air, and the room fills with the particular smell of this specific medicine. And then the healer begins to sing. The song is quiet, not loud, not meant for anyone but the person being treated in the plant medicine and the powers that the song invokes. It is sung in the old language, the ceremonial Cherokee, distinct from the everyday language, more formal, more ancient, more closely tied to the traditional knowledge system that these songs inhabit. The melody is simple but not monotonous. It circles like the Amazonian songs we encountered earlier, not linear, not building toward a climax, but spiraling, returning, reasserting. The rhythm is steady. Steady enough that the body can entrain to it, slow its own rhythm to match, settle. The child with the cough is sitting beside the fire. The medicine is administered, a tea carefully cooled to drinking temperature. The child drinks slowly, holding the warm cup in both hands the way children instinctively do, the warmth of the cup traveling into the palms, the warmth of the tea traveling down into the chest. The song continues. There is nothing dramatic in this scene. There is no crisis being averted, no fever being broken, no miracle being worked. There is a child who is coughing less, whose face has relaxed from the slightly pinched expression of sustained discomfort. There is a warm room and a steady fire and a patient, skilled person singing. And outside the house, the mountain. The Appalachian Mountains are alive in ways that are easy to miss if you're moving through them quickly. But on a quiet autumn evening, standing still, you can feel their presence, the enormous weight of stone under the soil, the deep drainage of water through layers of rock, the slow exhalation of the mountain itself, the temperature differential between the slope and the valley floor, which creates a breeze so gentle it is felt only on the skin, not heard. The Cherokee relationship to this landscape is not simply habitation, it is kinship. Specific mountains, specific rivers, specific rock formations, these are named and storied and understood as persons, not metaphorically. The Nanehi, a category of spirit beings in Cherokee tradition, live in the mountains and rivers in their own communities underground, parallel to the human world. They are not entirely separate from the human world. Sometimes they intervene, sometimes they help, sometimes they merely coexist, and sometimes, in the right conditions, they can be heard. The sound of water in a mountain stream in the night is a complex thing. It varies with the shape of the streambed, wider in one place, narrower in another, a rapid here, a pool there. Each variation creates a different quality of sound, so that the stream as a whole produces a kind of music that is never exactly the same twice but is always recognizably itself, always the voice of this particular stream in this particular mountain. The healer, done singing, sits quietly by the fire. The child is drowsing, the tea is finished. The song has done its work, not just pharmacologically, though the plant medicines are real and effective, but in the larger sense. The space has been attended to, the healing powers have been invited, the child has been held in a field of care. Outside, the mountain breathes. The cough will be better in the morning, whether from the medicine, the song, or simply the passage of a child's illness through its natural course, or all of these, working together, the child will be better. And the fire will burn down to coals, and the mountain will remain, and in the morning the stream will still be speaking in its many-voiced way about whatever streams speak of, and the healer will already be thinking about the next day's work, the next person to see, the next bundle of herbs that needs to be gathered before the season changes and the window closes. But for now, the child sleeps beside the fire, and the mountain is enormous and quiet around the warm house, and the song has settled into the air the way fragrance settles into fabric, invisibly, persistently, present long after the singing has stopped. The rice fields in the morning, indigenous Southeast Asia, the water that holds the sky meanwhile in another quiet corner of history, let us find a different kind of agriculture, the terraced rice fields of Southeast Asia. They exist in many places, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in Laos, in Myanmar and Thailand and China, but wherever they are found, they share a quality that photographs struggle to fully capture, the quality of light on flooded rice fields. The rice terraces of Bano in the Philippines were built over 2,000 years ago by the ancestors of the Ifugao people, carved into the steep mountainsides of the Cordillera Central, engineering the landscape to capture water from above and distribute it, terrace by terrace, down the slope. Each terrace is bounded by a stone wall, and the field behind the wall holds a thin layer of water, and in the right light, early morning, or late afternoon, or any cloudy day when the sky is uniform white, the water in each terrace reflects the sky. Looking down from above, in the right season, the mountain is a mirror, a staircase of mirrors, each one reflecting a slightly different angle of the sky, the whole creating an image that seems to belong to a dream rather than to geology and agriculture. The Ifugao people who built and maintain these terraces are among the many indigenous peoples of the Philippine highlands who have maintained their traditions in remarkable continuity through the centuries. The terraces themselves are still in active use. They were not abandoned. They are still being planted, maintained, harvested. Let us sit with a family in the highlands of the Cordillera, in a traditional Ifugao village. The house is elevated on massive posts of hardwood. If you see a traditional Ifugao house, the first thing that strikes you is the enormous mushroom-shaped caps at the top of each post, designed to prevent rats from climbing up into the granary. The roof is steep pitched thatch that extends far out over the walls, creating deep shade on all sides. Inside, the house is dim even in the middle of the day. The central space of a traditional house is the granary, rice, the stored rice, the wealth and the food security and the spiritual heart of the family's life. In Ifugao tradition, rice is not merely a crop, it is sacred. The spirits of the rice, the bulol, represented by carved wooden figures that live in the granary, must be honored and consulted. The bulol are extraordinary objects. Carved from malave wood, one of the hardest and most durable woods in the Philippines, the bulol are human figures, seated with hands on knees, faces serene, bodies worn smooth by generations of handling and contact with rice grain. They are the guardians of the granary. They are also, in the understanding of the Ifugao people, genuinely spiritually potent, not merely symbols but actual presences. Before the harvest is placed in the granary, ceremonies are performed. The bulol are addressed, thanked, informed of what is about to happen. This is not superstition in the dismissive sense. It is an acknowledgement of relationship, of the fact that the rice did not simply grow by itself, that forces and presences contributed to its growth, and that those contributions deserve recognition. On this evening, the harvest is recent. The granary is full. The family can breathe a specific kind of relief that people who are not dependent on agriculture rarely experience, the relief of adequate storage, of knowing that the year ahead has been provided for. The evening meal is rice. In Ifugao tradition, the rice is cooked in bamboo tubes over the fire. The bamboo imparts a slight flavor to the rice, a freshness, a green quality that is distinctive and immediately recognizable to anyone who has eaten rice this way. The rice is glutinous sticky, and is eaten by hand, formed into small balls, dipped into a sauce or eaten plain. After eating, the family sits together. The evening in the Cordillera Highlands is cool. The altitude here is significant, 1,200 meters or more above sea level, and the temperature drops noticeably after sunset. The fire is maintained less for cooking now and more for warmth and light. The grandfather of the family is a Mumbaki, a ritual specialist, a healer and priest, someone who knows the chants and ceremonies that maintain the relationship between the human community and the spirit world. He does not perform a formal ceremony tonight, but in the easy, informal way of evenings with family, he tells a story about the spirits. The spirits in Ifugao tradition are numerous and various. There are spirits of the forest, spirits of the water, spirits of the rice, spirits of the house, spirits of ancestors. There are benevolent spirits and malevolent ones, and many that are simply powerful, not inherently good or bad, but capable of either, depending on how they are treated. The grandfather's story tonight is about a young man who went into the forest without permission. Not without permission from his parents, though that would also have been a concern, but without permission from the forest spirits. He did not perform the small ceremonies that should precede a journey into the deep forest. He went in with the attitude of someone who considers the forest simply a place, not a community of beings with their own rules and their own expectations. In the forest, he became lost, not immediately. For a while he walked confidently, familiar landmarks appearing and then, gradually, ceasing to appear. The trails that he thought he recognized turned out to be different trails, or the same trails going in the wrong direction, or trails that seemed to loop back on themselves. By the time he realized he was genuinely lost, the sun was going down. The forest at night in the Cordillera is a different world than the forest in the day. The sounds change, the temperature drops sharply. The darkness between the trees is absolute, no moon could penetrate that canopy, and the sounds that fill the darkness are the sounds of creatures that don't need light to navigate. The young man sat against a tree and waited. In the morning, he was found by a relative who had been searching. He was cold and frightened but unhurt. When he returned to the village and told the Mumbaki what had happened, the Mumbaki listened carefully and then said, "You were lost because you went without asking. The forest let you go when you were humble enough to stop walking and simply wait." This is the kind of story that sounds, to an outsider, like simple superstition or folk wisdom about not overestimating your navigation skills. But in its own context, it is a story about the structure of the world, about the fact that the world has a social structure, that you are a guest in spaces that belong to others, that the appropriate behavior of a guest is to ask before entering, to thank when leaving, and to be humble in between. This principle that you are a guest in the world, that the world has other occupants whose presence and claims must be acknowledged, is one of the most persistent themes across indigenous traditions from every continent. It is a different relationship with the world than the one that industrial civilization has generally endorsed, not better or worse in every respect, but different in a way that produces different outcomes, different kinds of attention, different qualities of presence in a landscape. The grandfather's voice is low and steady. The fire pops. The rice in the granary is dry and full and protected by the patient carved bulo in their customary postures. Outside, the terraces are dark. The water in them reflects whatever light there is, which tonight is the stars, faint and mirrored in the still water between the rice stalks. The terraces step down the mountain and out of sight, 2,000 years of work, still holding, still giving, still reflecting the sky back to itself. The family sleeps. In the forest above the village, still, always, the forest breathes its slow breath, and the spirits that live in it go about their own lives in the dark, and the carved bulul sit in the granary watching over the rice, and the mountain holds everything on its ancient back. The desert fathers and the dreamers, indigenous North African and Berber traditions, where the sand remembers rain, and as the night deepens still further, let us find the desert again. A different desert this time. The Sahara, the largest hot desert on Earth, a space of such enormous emptiness that it could swallow the continental United States and ask for seconds. The Sahara is not simply sand, though it has its sand dunes, the great ergs, seas of sand that shift and move with the wind, building into dunes that can be hundreds of meters tall, traveling across the landscape at a pace that is perceptible if you watch over decades. The Sahara also has rock, vast plateaus of dark stone, the Ahagar and the Tassili Enager and the Taibsti, great highland masses where the rock is ancient, and the wind has carved it into shapes that seem intentional. Arches, pillars, hollows, overhangs that create sheltered spaces where 10,000 years ago, when the Sahara was wet and green and full of elephants and hippos and rivers, people lived and painted. The rock paintings of the Tassili Enager. They are among the most extraordinary things in the world. On the walls of rock overhangs in this remote plateau in southern Algeria, there are paintings, thousands of them, made over thousands of years, beginning perhaps 12,000 years ago and continuing until the Sahara dried out and the people moved on. The paintings show a world that no longer exists. Rivers, cattle, people swimming, crocodiles, hippos, elephants. a world of abundance in a place that is now almost completely dry. And they show the people who made them. The figures in these paintings are not generic. They are individuals shown doing specific things, herding cattle, swimming, dancing, hunting. They wear ornaments and clothing. They have postures that suggest personality, the slight lean of a body that is relaxed, the alert posture of a watcher, the particular way a person holds a burden on their shoulder. We cannot know their names. We cannot know their languages. We cannot know what they believed or what their stories were. But we can see that they were there, that they moved through this world with intention and attention, that they found these rock shelters worth marking with images, that something mattered enough to record. The Tuareg people, the Kel Tamashek, the people of the Tamashek language, have lived in the Sahara and its margins for at least 3,000 years. They are a Berber people, part of the wider family of North African indigenous peoples who inhabited the Sahara and the Atlas Mountains before the Arab conquest of the 7th century CE, and who persist today, mostly in the Niger, Mali, Algeria, and Libya, maintaining their distinctive traditions and their remarkable adaptation to the desert environment. Let us find a Tuareg camp on a desert night. The tents of the Tuareg are made of tan goat or camel leather, deep red or ochre, stretched over a wooden frame. They are low and rectangular, open on one or more sides to allow the passage of air in the desert heat, closed more completely against the cold desert night. Inside, the ground is covered with mats woven from palm fronds and camel hair blankets. The color of everything in a Tuareg camp is the color of the desert, ochre and red and golden and brown, except for the robes and veils, which can be spectacular blue. Indigo dyed cotton, so intensely colored that the indigo rubs off on the skin, giving Tuareg men who traditionally veil their faces, unlike many Muslim cultures, a distinctive bluish tinge that has given them the name, the Blue Men of the Sahara. The veiling of Tuareg men is worth noting because it inverts what many people expect. In the Tuareg tradition, it is the men who veil, beginning in adolescence, and the veil becomes more complete as a man ages and gains status. Women, by contrast, are unveiled. This is one of many aspects of Tuareg society that challenges assumptions. Tuareg women have traditionally had significant independence and property rights, and the society, while not without its own hierarchies and tensions, has a distinct character that does not fit neatly into any simple category. The evening in the desert camp is lit by fire and by stars. The fire is small, the stars are vast. Someone is playing the imzad, the one-stringed bowed instrument played by Tuareg women. The imzad is a violin of a kind, a half-gourd covered with skin, a single string of horsehair stretched between the neck and the body, played with a bow. The sound it makes is thin and high and slightly raw, not smooth, not polished. It sounds like the desert sounds, precise, spare, with nothing unnecessary. The music of the imzad accompanies the poetry. Tuareg poetry, tisnit, is an oral tradition of striking complexity and beauty. There are multiple categories of poetry for different occasions. Poetry of praise, poetry of love, poetry of grief, poetry that expresses philosophical reflection on the nature of things. The poet, not necessarily a professional, the way the griot is a professional, but anyone with the gift composes and recites, accompanied by the imzad. Tonight, an elder recites from memory a poem she has known since childhood. The poem is about the desert night. About the way the stars are different in the desert than anywhere else, not because they actually are, but because here there is nothing between you and them. No trees to soften the horizon, no buildings to interrupt the sky, just the flat earth and the enormous sky and the stars between them, burning with a cold intensity that makes you feel both very small and very present. The poem speaks of the ancestors who also looked at these stars. Tuareg are a people with a long memory of loss, the loss of the Green Sahara, which exists only in the paintings of Tassili and in something that might be called cultural memory, a sense of having once had more than is now present. The poems hold this memory carefully, not as grievance but as orientation. As we come from a place of greater abundance, and we carry that knowledge with us into the scarcity of the present. It is a moving thing to carry, not a comfortable thing, but a meaningful one. The camel is the central animal of Tuareg life, and the camel is a powerful presence in the poetry. Not in a romantic way, people who actually depend on camels see them clearly, know their irritability and their occasional stubbornness, their extraordinary endurance, their strange beauty. The poetry about camels is affectionate but unsentimental, the affection of people who know their animals deeply and are under no illusions about them. In the tent, the children are asleep already. The desert cold has arrived. The temperature has dropped 30 degrees from the afternoon peak, the clear, dry air releasing its heat rapidly into space. The blankets are pulled up. The youngest child is a tight, warm ball under the heaviest blanket. The elder's voice is quiet now. The imzad has stopped. There is only the voice and the fire and the stars. She is telling a story that her grandmother told her, about the time before the desert was a desert when this land was green. She does not claim to remember it. It happened long before human memory, or nearly so. But the story has been passed down, the story of the rivers and the trees and the animals, the story of the slow drying, the gradual retreat of the green southward, the adaptation required of the people who stayed. We learned to carry less, she says. We learned to move. We learned to read the sky for rain that might be far away, that might be 2 days' travel, that might not come at all. We learned the difference between surviving and living, and we chose to live. The fire pops. A camel somewhere outside makes the low grumbling sound that camels make in the night, not distressed, just present, making its presence known. The stars do not move, or rather they move so slowly that the movement is only perceptible over the course of an hour, the whole sky rotating imperceptibly around the still point of the North Star. The desert breathes. And the elder's voice drops lower still, and the poetry and the story weave together, and the fire burns down, and the cold presses in from the edges of the tent, and the children sleep deeply in their warmth. The long-counting Maya traditions, Mesoamerica, the day keepers, and as the night deepens toward its quietest hour, let us visit one more fire. South now, to the highlands and lowlands of what is now Mexico and Guatemala and Belize and Honduras, to the world of the Maya. The Maya civilization is one of the greatest intellectual achievements of the human species. Let that statement stand without qualification. The Maya independently developed writing, a fully realized writing system capable of recording any thought or statement in the Maya languages, using a combination of logograms, symbols that represent words, and syllabic signs, symbols that represent sounds. They developed mathematics, including the concept of zero, independently of the Old World traditions that developed it. They developed an astronomical knowledge of extraordinary precision. Their calculations of the Venus cycle, for example, were accurate to within a fraction of a day over thousands of years. And they developed their calendar. The Maya calendar, or rather, the interlocking system of calendars that the Maya used, is one of the most sophisticated time-keeping systems ever created. There is the Tzolk'in, a 260-day sacred calendar, in which each day has a number from 1 to 13 and one of 20 named days, cycling through all their combinations before repeating. There is the Hob, a 365-day solar calendar with 18 named months of 20 days each plus 5 unnamed days at the end. And when these two calendars are combined, their cycles synchronize only once every 52 years, a period called the calendar round. And beyond the calendar round, the long count. The long count is a system for recording days across enormous spans of time. It counts from a fixed starting point, corresponding to August 11, 3114 BCE in the modern calendar, and can record dates thousands of years into the future and past. It is the system responsible for the infamous 2012 calculation that circulated in the early 21st century, though what the long count actually reached at that point was simply the end of a particular cycle, the equivalent of a car odometer turning from 99,999 to zero, not an apocalypse. The people who created this system were not merely astronomers or mathematicians in an abstract sense. They were people who felt deeply and seriously that time was a living thing, that each day had a quality and a character, that some days were auspicious for certain activities and others were not, and that understanding the structure of time was a form of understanding the structure of the universe. The Ajkij, the day keepers, are the practitioners of the Maya calendar tradition who maintain this knowledge into the present day. In the highland Maya communities of Guatemala, the Kayich Maya, the Kakshikal, the Mam, and others, the Ajkij continues to be an active role, a living tradition, not a historical artifact. But let us go back to the period of the classic Maya. Let us find a city in the Maya lowlands, sometime between the 5th and 8th century CE, the height of the classic period, when the great cities of Palenque, Tikal, Copan, Calakmul, and dozens of others were at their fullest flourishing, their populations substantial, their architecture extraordinary. A Maya city at its height was a world of color and sound and movement that is difficult to reconstruct from the stone remains that survive. The stone temples and palaces that we see today were in their period of use painted, brilliantly, intensely painted. The limestone, which has weathered to pale gray, was covered in red and yellow and blue and green mineral pigments bound with tree resin, applied to a lime plaster ground that received them with a quality close to modern fresco. The sculptures that decorated the buildings were painted, the figures brought to life with color, the hieroglyphic inscriptions picked out in contrasting paint. Maya blue azul Maya is one of the most remarkable materials in the history of art. A vivid, intense blue, it was made from indigo combined with a particular clay, palygorskite, in a process that created a color of extraordinary stability. It has survived on surfaces that have been exposed to rain and sun and biological growth for over 1,000 years, still vivid. The city was also noisy. Markets where trade goods from across the Maya world and beyond, obsidian from the volcanic highlands, jade from specific river deposits, cacao from the lowland forests, cotton textiles, ceramic vessels, dried fish, rubber, All of this was traded and argued over and negotiated in a constant hum of activity. And the ceremony, Maya public ceremony, was large-scale and elaborate. The great plaza of a classic Maya city, the open rectangular space surrounded by temple pyramids, palace buildings, and stelae, was the stage for performances that combined dance, music, costume, sacrifice, and astronomical alignment into events of tremendous power. But the ceremony we are interested in tonight is smaller, more intimate. In a household compound, not the royal palace, but the dwelling of a merchant family, people of some status but not royalty, the evening is settling in. The rooms of the compound are arranged around a courtyard open to the sky. In the courtyard, a small fire. The rooms around it are of stone, their doorways draped with cotton cloth, their interiors dim and cool. An elder of the family, a grandmother who is also, by virtue of her years of training and her recognized gift, an adjkij, is the center of the evening's attention. She has with her the teazite seeds, the red seeds of the coral tree, erythrina, used in Maya divination as the physical embodiment of the days of the Tzolk'in. She counts them in patterns, the seeds moving through her fingers with the ease of long practice, the patterns not random but meaningful, each arrangement a question and an answer, a reading of the day's character. But tonight she is not divining, tonight she is teaching. Her granddaughter sits across from her, learning to handle the seeds, learning the names and qualities of the 20 named days. Each day has a name, a quality, a direction, a color, a ruling deity, an associated animal. The day a mix associated with the crocodile, the beginning, the earth's surface. The day Ik associated with wind, breath, spirit. The day Akbal associated with darkness, the night, the interior of the earth. The grandmother holds up a seed. This is a day, she says. Every day is a person, every day has feelings. The granddaughter repeats, every day is a person. What is the character of this day? The grandmother asks. This is the lesson, not memorization alone, though memory is required because there are 20 named days and 13 numbers and all their combinations and all their qualities and all their relationships. But beyond memorization, recognition, the ability to feel the quality of a day, not just name it. The grandmother tells a story about one of the days, the day Ajpu, associated with the blowgun hunter, with the hero twins of the Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh is the Maya creation narrative, recorded in the Kayich language in the 16th century but drawing on oral traditions of much greater age. It is one of the great literary documents in the history of the world, and unlike many such documents, it is the creation narrative of a living culture, still told and still meaningful. In the beginning of the Popol Vuh, there is darkness, still silence, no sound, no movement. The sky and the sea are there, but nothing else. And then the creators Tepu and Kuyukumats speak. They think and they speak, and the world begins. This is a creation through language, through naming. The world comes into being as it is spoken. This resonates across many traditions we have visited tonight. The Aboriginal songlines, where the world was sung into existence. The Maori creation narrative, where the genealogy of everything begins in darkness and silence. A world spoken into being must be maintained through language, must be continuously told. The day that is not named is a day that lacks its full character, its full potential. The story that is not told is a story that thins and fades. This is why the adjkij keeps the days. Not because they would stop existing without the keeping, but because the keeping is a form of honoring, and the honoring is what maintains the relationship between human time and the larger time that contains it. The granddaughter is listening intently. She is young enough that the full weight of what she is learning is not yet clear to her. She knows it is important. She knows her grandmother considers this the most important knowledge there is. But the full felt sense of it, the way the calendar becomes not an external system you apply to the world, but an internal rhythm you live by, that will come with years. For now, the seeds move through her fingers. The fire in the courtyard burns. The stars are visible through the open roof of the courtyard. The Maya built their observatories and their astronomies around these same stars. Venus rises on the eastern horizon. The grandmother watches it rise and says nothing. But in the tilt of her head, in the small nod, there is recognition. Venus rising at this time, in this position, that is meaningful. It is part of the larger pattern she has been reading for most of her life. The granddaughter follows the direction of her grandmother's gaze and sees Venus and knows that this rising means something, though she does not yet know all of what it means. The fire burns low. The courtyard is quiet. In the rooms around the courtyard, the rest of the family is sleeping. And the days continue their cycling, the 20 named days and the 13 numbers moving through their combinations, the calendar turning as it has turned for as long as there have been people to watch it turn, each day arriving with its own character, its own quality, its own gift, and its own challenge. And the grandmother sits in the firelight with the seeds in her hands, keeping the days, the thread that connects them all coming to rest, and now, at last, the night is very deep. We have traveled a long way tonight, across deserts and oceans, through forests and across plains, into snow houses and longhouses and tipis and malokas and Waranui and hogans. We have sat by fires that burned with very different fuels, dry pine and bison chip and seal oil and juniper and mulga wood and bamboo, but that all gave the same essential thing: warmth, light, the focal point around which people gather when the day is done. We have heard stories about the beginning of the world. The world sung into existence by the ancestors walking across flat, featureless earth. The world spoken into being in the darkness before sound. The world growing on the back of a turtle that rose from infinite water. The world emerging through a series of transformation, world below world, until the shining world of now. Every tradition we visited tonight has its own version of this. Its own answer to the question that every human being who has ever had a moment of stillness has asked: how did all of this come to be? And what am I in the middle of it? The answers are different. The landscapes are different. The languages, the instruments, the plants, the animals, the ceremonies, the structures, all of it is different. But the asking is the same, and the fire is the same, and the night is the same. Let us stay here for a moment in this thought, that every human being who has ever lived has experienced night. Every human being has experienced the sun going down, the light fading, the temperature dropping, the familiar world of the day becoming the mysterious world of the dark. And every human being in every culture across all of human history has responded to this by seeking warmth, seeking other people, seeking stories. Bedtime story may be the most universal human practice that exists, not the stories we tell in offices or written in books for children, though those are its descendants, but the thing underneath those, the gathering of people at the end of the day, around warmth, and the voice of someone who knows how to speak in a way that guides the mind from the bright, anxious world of full wakefulness toward the softer, stranger world of sleep. The stories we have heard tonight are thousands of years old. Some of them are tens of thousands of years old. They have traveled through time inside human minds, passed from mouth to ear and from ear to mouth, across generation after generation, each telling slightly different from the last, the story alive and breathing and changing even as it maintains its essential shape. This is a kind of miracle, not a supernatural miracle. Nothing breaks any physical law. But a miracle in the older sense of the word, something worthy of admiration, something that shows the astonishing capacity of human beings for care and continuity and connection. The stories survived everything. They survived drought and famine and the collapse of great civilizations. They survived conquest and displacement and the systematic violence of the colonial period. They survived forced relocation and the suppression of languages and the burning of libraries. They survived modernity's great indifference to the old ways. They survived because people kept telling them. In the dark, by fires and by oil lamps and by candles and by the bare light of stars, people kept telling the stories to their children. The children grew up and told the stories to their children, and so on. Right now, tonight, on the other side of the world from wherever you are, someone is telling a story to a child who is falling asleep. The story may be different from any we heard tonight. Fire may be a night light or a phone screen. The language is certainly different, but the structure is the same: the voice, the dark, the warmth, the mind moving from the day toward the dream. It has always been this way, and it will continue. Now let us let the night do what nights do. Let the stories settle, the way sediment settles in water that has been disturbed, slowly, gradually coming to rest on the floor of the mind in layers, each layer complete, each one supporting the next. The desert breathes. The longhouse is warm. The igloo holds its family against the cold. The hogan faces east, waiting for morning. The maloka rocks with its hammocks. The tipi smokes its thin line into the starlit sky. The warnui holds the carved ancestors in the dark. The terraces mirror the stars in their shallow water. The kagak fire burns to its embers. The griot's kora is packed away. The daykeeper holds the seeds. The mountain is quiet. The river moves. The fire is down to a deep red glow, and you are here. Exactly here in whatever warmth you have gathered around you, in whatever darkness surrounds you, breathing slowly, the day releasing its grip on your mind. The stories are inside you now, along with everything else that has ever entered through the door of listening. Every voice, every image, every gentle detail of water and firelight and sleeping children and patient elders in vast, quiet landscapes under enormous skies. Let them be there. Let them settle. You do not need to do anything with them. You do not need to remember them, categorize them, review them. They have already gone where they needed to go. The Aboriginal elder by the dying fire looks up at the emu in the sky and sees the emu walking. The Haudenosaunee grandmother sets down her work and listens to the snow outside. The Inuit hunter turns toward his igloo and steps into the tunnel. The grandmother at the loom makes one more pass of the shuttle and lets her hands rest. The song in the Amazon forest has no ending. It simply continues, below the audible range of the sleeping village, inside the river, inside the root systems of the trees, inside the breathing of the sleeping families in their hammocks. The Lakota children dream of white buffalo running across the prairie. The griot sleeps with the names of 1,000 generations resting easily in his trained mind, ready for tomorrow. The Maori child looks at the carved face of the ancestor and is not afraid. The Ifugao bulls sit in their granary, patient and still, watching over the rice. The Tuareg woman wraps her blanket closer and listens to the desert. The granddaughter holds the seeds and feels the days cycling through her fingers. The Cherokee healer's house is dark, the fire down to coals, and the mountain breathes, and the sky turns slowly as it always turns. And the stories move through time like water through stone, not quickly, not dramatically, but persistently, shaping everything they touch, carrying something from one place to another, arriving at the sea of the present moment, having traveled an enormous distance in the dark. Sleep now. The stories know the way. They have been traveling this road for a very long time, and they will be here in the morning. The fire is out. The coals are dark. The sky is the color of the moment just before dawn, not quite light, not quite dark, a color that has no name in most languages. In the world right now, children are sleeping, grandparents are sitting quietly, stories are resting inside minds that are dreaming, and the world is old and warm and full of people who have always done exactly this. Rest well. You are not alone in the dark. You never were.